For Aries rising and or moon sign for August 2023, Aries, your ruler Mars is moving through Leo until the 18th of August, your fifth host sign, and then will enter Virgo on the 18th and will aspect your sign. So when Mars moves into the sixth host sign, it has an eighth house aspect onto your sign, and therefore Mars, as well as Saturn and Rahu contained within Aries, all impact your sign in a very strong way. And in a way, this can be more positive if channeled in a more productive manner. But of course, these aspects, these planets can also be quite challenging if you're not on board, if you're not willing to do the work that it's asking you to do, to look at yourself, to make the changes that need to be made, to perhaps stand up for yourself, or whatever it is that you're challenged to do at this point, and especially towards the end of August. I think Aries, this is a time for you to rise to the challenge and to make the most of these powerful transits. So the first thing to say is that there are only 3 more months of Rahu, the North Node, moving through your sign. It has probably been a very exciting, changeable, nerve-wracking experience for you in the last over a year now. And it has changed many things, I'm sure, for you. It has asked you, though, ultimately to develop strength and courage and to hold your nerve and to experience yourself in many different ways and understand what is the self anyway. And Jupiter, present now for the last few months and will be here until next April, is a more buoyant transit, and that can help you through these transitions, these changes. So Mars, initially in your fifth house in the host sign Leo, is very much about self-expression. However, because Mars in Leo is opposite Saturn in Aquarius, there's this tension that has been building and has, I'm sure, been self-evident in your life in the past few weeks. This continues into August until Mars moves into Virgo by the end of the month. So that's something to be mindful of, not to overdo it, not to push too hard. And if you do push too hard, then perhaps feeling that pushback and perhaps even feeling it as tension in your body if Aries is your rising sign. At the same time, we have the sun in Cancer, your fourth host sign in the home, and we have the full moon with Pluto in your 10th host sign. And of course, this is reflecting the biggest changes that have been happening in your life for many years, as the 10th house of career has been going through a lot of changes for you, and that has been impacting your home life, your happiness, your contentment. And this full moon that starts off the month in your 10th host sign with the sun in the fourth, and then eventually leading to a full moon by the very end of the month in your 11th host sign with the sun in your fifth house, it's asking you to look at this transition from fourth to fifth and 10th to 11th. So the fourth to fifth is very much about your happiness, and when you feel happy, safe, secure, how much more creative and expressive you can be. And on the other side of the zodiac, the 10th to 11th transition is looking at the work you're doing or anything you're doing, any actions you're taking, and what you wish to gain from that. The earnings that you gain from your career, for example, is just one thing, but it could be anything that you do and what you want to achieve doing that, and looking at your ambitions. So this is sort of very much an inner expression of these planets and an outer expression, the kind of inner happiness, joy, contentment that you're seeking now, and self-expression and creativity and love. And then on the other side of the zodiac, you're looking for more professional standing and looking to get something going and achieve something greater. Of course, the challenge here is that they can be pitted against each other, that there's just this sense of wanting safety and happiness and security versus the changes that are happening in your career that are perhaps uncertain, and this can feel like a very much like a challenge and an opposition, like I said, more so the Mars Saturn opposition as well, where you might feel like this pushback against your plans, or you might feel some tension around some group dynamics. For example, you might have something that you want to do, but others maybe are not on board, or it might be around your children, fifth house. And so it might be that there's some tension there in terms of what you want to do with them, and some group dynamics. And I guess a lot of um, that happens in the summer months also for many people, where there's some tension around plans, social plans with children out of school and things like that. But anyway, it's essentially representing sort of two very sort of separate parts of you, what seem completely separate, very inner and outer, very private and public parts that are having to be, balanced off each other. And there might be a lot of jostling around for things in the month of August. The other thing to say, the big thing, is that Venus is retrograde right now, your seventh lord. So now you're having to, while you're dealing with all of those private public issues, you're having to deal with changes with your relationship. So Aries, this is something to be really mindful of, because Venus will go retrograde until the 4th of September. It will backtrack from your 5th into your 4th house, opposing Saturn and Pluto. And so this kind of configuration can show some power dynamics, some power struggles going on in your relationship. And that's something to be mindful of, and to be open to the changes that are happening now that might not be obvious at all. But I think it's a time to be just cognizant of needing to slow down, pay attention, to appreciate, your relationship more for, the many things I'm sure that you have to appreciate. And if you find things to criticize, if you find things that are lacking in any way, because Venus will be combust in August, and so you can't see it. So if you can't see the thing to appreciate in your partner or in your family or some relationship of some kind, or even financially, if there's something that you can't see, if you can't see the money coming, if you can't see the enjoyment in that, doing that, or with somebody, then look within for that joy, that inner joy, you might say. So that's something that's more complex in a way, as well, as Venus enters combustion into August, as it will backtrack into the sign Cancer, your 4th house sign. And again, like I said, by the end of August, we have a full moon, another full moon, 2 full moons in 1 month in Aquarius. But before then, we have a new moon on the 16th. So let me go back here. On the 16th, we have a new moon at the very, let me put it back here so you can see. So basically, it's a full moon in Cancer, but it's the very last degree of Cancer. So your 4th house moving into your 5th house. And again, it's this transition from 4th to 5th, from what would make you feel content and home and safe. And then when you feel that safety, stability, and grounded in that kind of safety at home, then you can be more expressive, more creative. And that again ties in with whether you're doing something creative, any kind of work yourself, or whether it's with your children, or any kind of plans actually for the future. The more safe and secure you feel right now, the more likely you're going to take risks and plan something for your future. And that's what these planets reflect here in the signs Cancer and Leo. But of course, we have another interesting thing going on by the 23rd, and that is we have Mercury retrograde. So this adds complications. So by the 18th, Mars has moved into Virgo, your 6th house sign. So it is a powerful position for Mars, absolutely. 6th sign is very good for overcoming challenges, dealing with any problems, any shortcomings. You can tackle it head on. But by the 23rd, with Mercury going retrograde in your 5th and Venus continuing to retrograde in your 4th, there's a lot of personal issues that you're having to work out now. And so it might be with your partner, it might be with family, might be with somebody that you're having to deal with something, whereas you want to push ahead, because Mars at this point is really the only planet moving full steam ahead. All the other planets are either retrograde or preparing to, as Jupiter by September will retrograde in your sign. So really the only planet that's moving ahead is Mars, is your ruler. And so because it's doing so in the 6th sign, you might find that there's some conflict to deal with, or some challenge to overcome, and something to do where, while everything else is saying that, not now, not now, not yet, or redo that, or review that, don't do it that way, do it this way, you still want to push ahead with Mars. And so with it in Virgo, I think it's important to find something to push ahead with, to have something you can work on, even if it's just working on yourself. Like if, for example, 6th house is very much like a exercise routine or a health regime or something that you're on, So Mars in the 6th needs some sort of work. especially when it's the sign Virgo. It's just that with Mercury retrograde now from the 23rd of August until mid-September in your fifth sign, whatever you do, it's probably best to redo things. It's probably best to, if you're, instead of starting a new thing, a new habit, a new health regime, a new exercise plan that you haven't done before, it's probably best to go back to one that you have done previously that you know well, and you can, work with that. It's probably best to, if you're planning any other kind of creative work, that you're redoing things or you're reworking something and rejigging it so that you can make it better, other than probably coming up with something completely new and starting a new project. And these planets, like I said, all of them except for your ruler Mars retrograde, suggests that it's not the best time to start something brand new in a sense. And if you do, that's fine, but just recognize that it'll have a lot of this sort of having to backtrack all the time with it and review it, and a constant review of it. So the other thing to say is a more complex transit at this time as well is that your ruler Mars is now opposite Neptune in Pisces. And so it's balancing off very two disparate parts of your being. Mars in Virgo, which is very exacting or likes to be, and plans and is very strategic, versus Neptune and Pisces, your 12th sign, which is very dreamlike and very spacey and sort of not very clear about anything. And so this might be a bit challenging to get the balance right here. And it's important that you do get a balance right between your everyday routines and the plans you have and the strategy that you have moving forward. You've got an action plan and you want to go and plan it and set it all out, and that's great. But if you don't balance that with just maybe giving yourself some downtime and dreamy time, some daydreaming to bring in some more creative aspects here, then it could feel like you're maybe not very clear about details, and it might be not very clear about how you're going to go forward with this when this is combined with all the retrogrades. So I'll talk next month about Jupiter, which is about to station in your sign. And it's about to station where Mercury had previously stationed in April, and then it will actually move back through the same degrees that Mercury went back through in April, May. So that's a whole other, in September, a whole other big review, a big reassessment of why you're doing anything, what gives your life meaning and purpose. So I'll talk more about that in September, but I hope for now that has been helpful, Aries. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Taurus rising and or moon sign for August 2023. Taurus, your ruler Venus is now in retrograde. It's in the whole sign Leo, your fourth whole sign. And this is your home life. This is the happiness and contentment that you feel. Or perhaps at this time, you're really going deeply into that and seeing where you don't feel that, and maybe where you have to jig that. Maybe there's something that you have to redo in your daily life that helps you recapture that sense of happiness and enjoyment and an inner joy more than anything else, with Venus retrograde now in your fourth house. But because Venus rules your sixth house along with your rising sign or your moon sign, if that were the case, then it's asking you to redo something. And this kind of really, I think, is a big theme of August for you, redoing something that again brings you joy. Venus will backtrack into your third whole sign by 7th of August and will enter combustion at that time as well. So really for the whole of August, we can't see Venus. We can't see your ruling planet. It's disappearing into the rays of the sun from the evening star to the bright morning star. This transition is always a complex one for you, Taurus. And in this case, it's very much about, again, this home life, happiness, inner joy, especially if there are no outer things that are giving you that, and looking for that inner joy within yourself. And then back into the third house and looking at how you can go about getting whatever it is you want. Third house is very much about, and it's a very sexual house as well. The third house is very flirtatious. It's very much about enjoying just the everyday interactions. And if it's even just walking down to the shop and dealing with people on an everyday basis, third house is very much about your everyday moving around and short trips and journeys around. And it's also about flirting. It's also about communicating. It's all about interacting with other people. So a Venus retrograde here combusting your third sign, so it does suggest that there's a need to, obviously really focus on that and just finding joy in the everyday stuff. Really, they're very, it doesn't always have to be really massive, big, profound things that happen that give you a sense of happiness. It could be just those everyday interactions. So the sun then, obviously in your third sign, as Venus combusts, will move into your fourth house sign by mid-month, where Mars is for the first couple of weeks of the month also. So there's a lot of focus on this third and fourth sign. And as this focus on third and fourth, very sort of much about what you want, essentially, what would make you happy, as they juxtapose with all of these planets, Pluto and Saturn, the full moon starting out the month in Pluto and Capricorn, and then the full moon with Saturn in Aquarius by the very last day of the month. It's sort of like pitting these two areas against each other. And the 9th and 10th houses, Capricorn and Aquarius, Saturn signs, is very much about your purpose in life and meaningful pursuits and actions that you take that give your life meaning. And whether that's a job or whether that's anything that you're doing that gives you a sense of meaning and purpose. And because Pluto is here sort of asking you to remove anything that's not meaningful or purposeful and focusing on what you can do and what you essentially have to redo with Saturn retrograde in your 10th house, the full and moon at the beginning and then the full moon at the end in these two signs opposite all these planets in your third and fourth sign is asking you to really think about the bigger picture here, whatever it is about you, whatever it is you would enjoy in the short term. Because the third house in the way is very much like instant gratification. And when Venus retrogrades opposite these planets, it's really asking you to find more balance in what is a more immediate gratification versus what is more meaningful for the long term. What would be the best thing to do in the long term, but also to find some joy in the more immediate time frame? And not to really, I guess, overemphasize one or the other, because it's asking you to balance each other, both off each other. And that might be a challenge. That might be a challenge because, for example, with Mars in your fourth house sign in the home, there's something happening in the home situation opposite to Saturn in your 10th house where there's some block here. You know, Mars and Saturn are sort of pitted against each other for the first couple of weeks of August anyway, and that has been the case in July. So that's been building to a sort of really intense opposition. So, for example, if there's something that you would find happiness in, but you cannot do it, that's Mars in the fourth, Saturn in the 10th, you know, it could be frustrating for you. But at the same time, if you find a different way of approaching this and finding again that there's something I can do in my immediate environment that gives me joy, but I also have to think about the bigger picture here and the long-term impact of anything that I do and its consequences. And that's essentially what all these planets on either side of the zodiac and these two very, again, almost disparate parts, like very extreme separate parts of you is highlighting. Rahu continues in your 12th sign. Jupiter will continue to slow down through August and actually will stop moving by the beginning of September and retrograde. And therefore, all the planets will be retrograde by the beginning of September. The only planet that's not retrograde is Mars. And so Mars will move into Virgo by the 18th. And Venus at this point will be back in your third sign, like I said. So Sun will have just moved into Leo, your fourth sign. But Mars, the only planet that's moving forward, and Jupiter itself moving backwards from September in Mars's sign, with Mars now looking on from your fifth house sign. Really, the fifth house sign, the fifth sign with Mars is the only thing that's kind of moving forward. Everything else has to go into review, including the fifth ruler, the ruler of Virgo. That's Mercury in a few days after on the 23rd. So Mercury stations retrograde in Leo in your fourth house. So that clearly shows, or maybe it's not clear, that's the point, is that whatever plans you're making now in the more immediate time frame and something that you want to do that you think will make you happy, it all has to be reviewed. It's not going to move forward as smoothly or as clearly as you think it would. And maybe that's the best thing. It's kind of like that saying, you know, be careful what you wish for. Here, it's probably better to kind of just reconsider everything that you're hoping and wishing for and what you're planning for, especially because Mars in Virgo, though good for planning and, even strategizing, like really good for strategy. And it's the fifth house, which is very much about planning something in the future. The issue with Mercury retrograde now is that there's some detail that you have to go back over, and you have to keep going back over these things while all these planets retrograde. So really, to keep yourself in this kind of mode of, okay, keep moving forward and planning ahead, but at the same time, having to keep looking back at the details, looking back at all of these long-term implications to anything that's you're planning right now, and try not to just like bundle your way through this, I would say, and just move forward without any due consideration. Again, although Mars is the only planet that's moving forward and gung-ho about planning ahead, again, because everything else is moving back, including the planet that rules where Mars is, Mercury, it's important to just reconsider everything you're doing. Like, think twice and three times about everything that you're doing. Make sure that if you're signing anything, if you're doing anything important at this time, that you're really clear about it before you ever do anything. And even then, keep an open mind about how this might all pan out in the long term, that there might have to be some renegotiation further down the line, I would say. So the full moon I mentioned was in the beginning of the month. That's in your ninth sign. And we finished the month with the full moon in your 10th sign. A new moon in your third sign. Between all of that, again, it's highlighting this transition in a way from the 9th to the 10th, and it's asking you, in a sense, again, to balance that off the third. What is it you're doing, and what is giving your life meaning, and how can you find more meaning while also just finding more enjoyment in the everyday? Because sometimes the meaningful things, the hard things that we have to do, aren't always enjoyable. But these transits in August are asking you to find some enjoyment in that, and to really not shirk your responsibilities, I would say, just for some instant gratification. So it's definitely a tricky month in many ways. Taurus, there's a lot to kind of figure out here. But you can, instead of feeling it as an opposition, as a kind of pushback, you can find a balance between all of these apparently conflicting impulses. And again, find some enjoyment in it even. So I hope that's been helpful, Taurus. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Gemini rising and or moon sign for August 2023. So Gemini, your ruling planet Mercury is moving through your third host sign, Leo, for the whole month, because it's going to spend quite a few weeks here as it's slowing down and then going to retrograde from the end of the month. So from August 23rd, it will station retrograde and continue to retrograde until September 15th. So it's going to be here for a couple of months, essentially, in your third sign. And Mercury retrograde in the third sign, in the house of communication and interaction, is very much about you reconsidering how you communicate. And that doesn't just mean communicating to other people. Third house is as much about the voice in your head. So thinking about how you talk to yourself every day, that voice in your head, what's it saying? And maybe having a really good look at that, a long, hard look at that, because Mercury in your third retrograde is opposite Saturn in your ninth. And Saturn in your ninth also retrograde, along with all the other retrogrades in August, is essentially asking you to really think long and hard about what you think, how you express what you think, and also what you believe, and the implications of what you believe, the consequences to all of these beliefs that you have that maybe could do with a bit of a shakeup. Because Saturn retrograde in your ninth whole sign opposite is very much, and in the sign Aquarius especially, is very much about a shakeup of your old belief systems that no longer suit the current climate, your current life, your current situation. The changes that you've been through recently are, reflecting that you need to change the way you look at these things and what you believe is possible. And with now Mercury slowing down, stationing opposite Leo, their opposition by the 1st of August actually is almost exact into the 2nd of August for the full moon. So there's definitely this sort of maybe a need to look at this more closely, to focus on it, to use it in that way, to focus, as opposed to feeling it as a pressure and a block in some way, because one person's block is another person's focus. Let's put it this way. Sometimes you need a bit of a block. Sometimes you need a bit of restrictions for you to be more creative and expressive. If you weren't focused enough, it's kind of too scattered. So these energies are asking you to be a lot more focused, and you can be a lot more creative. Again, creative in any kind of which way, because the third house very much could be creative, um, doing something creative, but it could be just thinking creatively, thinking about how can I approach that differently? How can I express that differently? How could I write that differently? How could I, even if it's just sending off an email, how could I be more creative in how I write this? Whatever it is, third house is that. And again, ninth house opposite is very much about the higher minded things in terms of more of your belief systems and long held beliefs as well that maybe could do with a shakeup. Now, on top of that, Venus, you can see here, is retrograde. When you have a line under the planets, it means that it's going backwards from our perspective. So Venus is also retrograde, and it will move back up into your second sign. It's in your third whole sign, where Mars also is here, opposite Saturn, and it will back up into your third sign by the 7th. So this is going to, and let me just show you that. So this is going to obviously be this back and forth over second and third. Venus has already been through your second, where the sun moves through the first couple of weeks of August and moved into your third. Now it's going back from your third into your second. So thinking about the third and second, third house, again, like I said, is about how you communicate, but it's not just communication. It's about actually what you want to communicate, and essentially what you want, full stop. The third house is very much about our wants and desires. So thinking about your desires, thinking about what you want, and thinking about how you now can say what you want, to be more clear about what you want and to speak what you want. That's what the second house is more about. And why you want anything is because you want to feel safe. You want to feel secure. That's also second house. You want to enjoy it. That's for Venus retrograde in your second house. There is something here that's important to you. You value. Second house is about your values. And so thinking about why you go for anything and how you get what you want, but also why you do that. Again, thinking backwards in a sense with the retrogrades, it's about, okay, this I value this. This is important to me. This would give me a sense of safety and security. And therefore, I want this, and this is how I'm going to get it. It normally goes in that forward direct motion from second to third house. But in this case, it's going backwards in terms of Venus, at least. So it's about, okay, I said this, I think this, and maybe I need to rethink this or approach how I go about this in a different way. And then actually, what is this anyway? Why do I want this? Why did I say that? Why do I think that? So these are some things to think about. This might have something to do about your creative self-expression, for example, but it could also be something around your children if you have any. Something here that you love, someone you love perhaps, something that has to be worked out here. And again, it could be just these conversations that you're having in your head. It's like, why do I think that? Or why did I say that? And so these are all things to think about in August. Now, Venus will be combust in August. As you can see here, it's meeting with the sun in your second whole sign, and is very much about family dynamics also, who, are the ones who instilled your values in you. So it's very much about values, self-worth, thinking about what's important to you and what gives you safety and security. And a lot of the time, that's a lot to do with money as well. So there could be some money issue as well here in terms of any creative outlet, in terms of your children. It could be something here to deal with in terms of money issues. Mercury continues to move forward. Mars moves forward in Leo. Actually, Mars is the only planet moving forward really at any great speed, and it's the only planet moving forward into the beginning of September, because Jupiter is also going to slow down, retrograde. Mercury by the end of August will retrograde, your ruler. I'll show you that now. So really the only planet moving forward is Mars. So if we see this here, Mars by the 23rd, you can see it's already moved into Virgo, but later on the 23rd here, let me go back to your sign, actually. Sorry, let me keep it in Virgo and let me go a day forward. So on the 23rd, Mercury, your ruler, stations retrograde. The sun has moved into Leo from the 16th of August. So it's, again, moving forward from your second to your third. It's the same transition I was talking about. Like, this is important to me, and then I want to get this. This is important to me. I want to express this. So now that you have got maybe more clear about what is important to you, what you want to get. Mercury is going to station retrograde and then maybe put a bit of a spanner in the works, because it's like, oh, did you really want that? Or what do you really want? Or that saying, be careful what you wish for, could apply here. So thinking about, Mercury retrograde in your third house is about actually rethinking about everything that you want and everything that you're saying, everything you're communicating with yourself and others, how you interact, how you move about, how dexterous are you, how clear are you about what you're saying, and what are you saying anyway, why are you saying that? These are all things to think about, and you're going to be thinking a lot about them, of course, with Mercury retrograde in your third house sign. So like I said, Mars is the only planet moving forward at this point, and although Jupiter's moving forward, it's slowing down by the end of August and will prepare to move retrograde in your 11th house sign. And that's very much about, well, what you want to gain from all of this anyway, from whatever you're doing. And with Mars now in your fourth house sign of happiness, of home, and that peace and sanctuary that you're looking for, aspecting Aries and Jupiter placed therein, then it's obviously a time to think about removing any blocks to getting what you want and your bigger wants, in this case, your higher ambitions, your bigger goals in life. So what's holding you back from your big ambitions? And Mars being the only planet moving forward in Virgo, which normally is very strategic and planning, and all of that is highlighted with Mars and Virgo. That's normally good for that around, again, whatever it is in the home situation that maybe you need to plan around. Maybe there's some clear out that you need to do to get really clear and start to put in an action plan of doing what you need to do at this point. But because Mars is opposite Neptune in Pisces in your 10th house sign in the house of work, and because Mercury has just stationed retrograde in Leo, and all these planets, Mercury and the Sun and Venus, are all opposite these other planets, Pluto and Saturn, in your 8th and 9th, with Neptune now in your 10th opposite Mars, there's not a lot of clarity here by the end of August. Because even though August starts out with this sense of, okay, I'm really going for what I want, and I'm thinking about these things, and now planning ahead and putting things in place, Mars in Virgo opposite Neptune shows that there could be some uncertainty around some work dynamic, for example, something that's happening, or some actions that you're taking that are not very clear, and then it's very hard to kind of plan these things out. There could be some issues at home because of that. There could be some arguments at home, so just be mindful of any kind of arguments at home, because Mars is your 6th lord, is your 11th lord in your 4th house, making sure that you're not having any arguments. Any kind of socializing at all at this point, be mindful of, any engagement with other people in general. I would say that you're not taking your frustrations out on other people, that they're not taking their frustrations out on you also, and that these could be frustrating because, again, even though Mars is moving forward, it's the only planet doing so, and it's doing so opposite Neptune. So whatever it is that you're planning, it's not very clear perhaps, or there's a lot of replanning, a lot of review that has to go into all of this. And so again, thinking a lot about how you get what you want and what it is you want and what are you doing anyway. And so a very complex month in many ways, August. It's a very complex time to try and figure all these things out, but it's the best time to do so, to get really clear eventually. I want to just say that going back to the beginning of the month, the transition I want to highlight here is the transition from the full moon in your 8th sign to the full moon in your 9th sign. We start the month off on the 1st of August with the full moon with Pluto in your 8th sign. This is like all of the things that you have no control over, despite all of these things you're going for. All of the unexpected, unforeseen circumstances, the things that crop up that you have absolutely no control over. That's what starts the month out. But what ends the month is a full moon in Saturn sign, with Saturn in Aquarius, your 9th house sign. And that's asking you to really think long and hard about the long-term implications about what you believe is possible right now. And again, with Mercury retrograde opposite, how you communicate what you believe to be possible and true for you. And perhaps Saturn retrograde in your 9th house sign with this full moon at the end of the month is asking you to really reconsider what you believe. And it's not easy, but it's asking you to shake up your belief systems, asking you to look at, what is my limiting belief around this? And actually, how might I completely change that belief so that I can see a better way around this? And in a way, it's kind of like having to think your way around things and to actually convince yourself around things in a different way. And with Mercury retrograde now opposite Saturn, with this full moon, I really think that it's a time to find more balance between, again, these bigger themes and consequences about how you think about things in a broader view, and like, again, deeper, longer held beliefs that are harder to maybe budge. But at the same time, by doing so, you can approach it differently with a different mindset and view it as a different way of a new possibility that can come in by just kind of moving around it or changing your views around it in some way. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. You might be challenged to think differently, to communicate differently, to approach it differently. But that's what these transits are asking you to do. And yeah, although a complex time, I think it could be a very rewarding time despite the challenges, or because of the challenges, because it's going to give you that impetus to actually make some changes to what you think and how you communicate what you think and why you think what you think. Like really going deeper, really burying deeper down into it. Obviously, the more obvious practical advice would be from any astrologer when Mercury is retrograde in your third house, as all of this is happening from the end of the month, is to be really patient with yourself and other people when you're communicating anything. So this could lead to a lot of impatience. And again, like I said, it could be that there's some issues and you just don't rest well with whatever, even if you have an argument, right? It's like, think about whether that argument is worth it, and maybe just think about things that you need to work out on your own first before you get into that kind of debate with somebody. So, Gemini, I hope that's been of help. I wish you all the best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Cancer rising and or moon sign for August 2023. So Cancer, there is a lot going on in your sign and the second host sign, while also in the opposite sign and the eighth sign. So all of the planets line up in your first and second, and seventh and eighth. And so this is very much about relationships and family dynamics, your family as well as your partner's family. There's a lot of things to work out here, a lot of things to balance off each other, to bounce off each other, perhaps, and to look at it that way as opposed to maybe conflict with each other, to oppose each other, because that could also be a tendency here. And as all of these planets line up opposite each other and they're all retrograde, essentially, the only planet that isn't going to be retrograde is Mars by the end of September into the beginning of, or the end of August into beginning of September. Then there's a lot to rework here as well, and to review and to reassess, and to reassess yourself, your family life, you're communicating how, what you want, and safety and security and financial issues and all of that with your partner, with other people in general. And, so a lot to figure out here, Cancer. And this is also obviously all around the nodes in your fourth and 10th house. The changes, the more maybe less obvious changes that are happening in your home and work life, or they could be more obvious at this point. And certainly in the 10th house, work life, because of Jupiter, Rahu, Uranus, all here making those changes. Now, Jupiter itself is going to slow and station by the beginning of September. So that's to come in September, this whole review of what it is you want in terms of your career, and the bigger picture for the end of the year, really, from the 4th of September until the 31st of December. Jupiter will go backwards through your 10th house of career, asking you to really reassess, where you're going in terms of your career life. And because Mercury has already done this in April, May, there is obviously a revisiting in some way, but in a more meaningful way, perhaps, of these themes around work. But Mercury itself is going to station retrograde in August into the middle of September, by the end of August, in your second sign, which links to career in many ways as well. And one way, of course, more obviously, is finances. So in terms of reviewing your finances and your family dynamics and setup and all of that, and again, finding balance with your partner and your partner's family, there's something, in other words, that you have to work out here in very many practical ways as well, in terms of financially with family and relationships and all of that. But there's also a lot of deeper things to figure out here. And retrogrades essentially always show that there's a deeper influence here. There's something to work out, to go within, to find within yourself, to find the worth in something in yourself, obviously also, but also find the worth of something apart from the more obvious outer thing. So I hope I'm not being too vague for you here or abstract, but essentially, for example, if it were that your finances are in any way challenged right now, or there's some insecurity around finances, which is very potentially the case right now because of all the planets in your second sign, opposite Saturn in your eighth sign. So if you have a sense of, even a threat to yourself and your finances or your family or something going on here, some sort of thing that makes you feel uncertain and vulnerable because of that, it's important that you find some sense of safety, security, and happiness within yourself. And that's essentially what reflects the second house and first house, as Venus will go backwards from your second house to your first house. And it will do so by the 7th of August. So you can see here, Venus backtracks into Cancer. It's asking you to really look at um, yourself and look for that inner joy, essentially. Venus retrograde is that anyway, but certainly retrograde in your first house as ruler of your fourth and 11th houses. Cancer, this is very much about finding that joy within yourself. Home life and friendships and social life and all of these things are going to go through a major review, of course, at this time. What or who makes you happy? Your friends that make you happy, your home life, your social life, all of these things. Looking for that happiness, in the outer world might, have some shortcomings, because Venus retrograde now is also combust. When a planet's combust, you can't see it. So if you can't see Venus, if you don't see your friends, for example, then you might have to look for something else somewhere else. You might have to find happiness somewhere else. In other words, trying to think of really practical examples of this, for example. But I mean, if I keep it in a broader sense, it will play out in its own way for you personally. Another example would be fourth house, 11th house, the mother, your home life, but also your mother. There could be something going on with your mother that you're having to review. Maybe it's her own home setup, her own situation, her own happiness that you're having to consider, because it's very much you having to consider this, because it's Venus retrograde in your sign now. And again, Venus retrograde and combust, and you can't see it. So you're having to look for it somewhere else. It's like not obvious. And so there might be some relationship issues with your mother, with home life, with something that you cannot see that you have to work out with these people, like whether it's family, mother, home, someone at home, the partner. All of these things have to be sort of addressed right now. I want to go back to the beginning of the month because I want to show you that we're starting the month with a full moon in your 7th house on the 1st of August, and we'll end the month on the 31st of August with another full moon in this time in your 8th house. And it's highlighting the transition from 7th to 8th and opposing all these planets that transit from your 1st to 2nd. And again, it's the self, yourself, your sense of self and worthiness and self-worth and safety and security, that's 2nd house, versus your partner, any other, and their sense of safety and security, their finances, their setup. And so you're having to find a balance between all of these. And with the full moon beginning the month in the 7th and ending the month in the 8th, moving from Pluto to Saturn, it's really highlighting this transition and going deeper into your relationship and going beyond the sort of fear-based reaction that this could obviously highlight in any kind of dynamic with anybody, and going deeper and finding out what makes your life more meaningful in a way when you face your fears of insecurities and changes, and very much unexpected changes, and perhaps changes that have already happened. When you deal with those things and you think about the consequences of those, when you think about the long-term implications about any kind of changes that are happening right now, and you don't shirk away from that you really address it and you don't try and avoid it, that there are some things to deal with now. In other words, this transition from the 7th to the 8th house in August is asking you to look at those things, whether it's a relationship issue, that it's that conversation maybe you've been putting off and you just don't feel like having. By the end of the month with Saturn and Moon, the full moon, and highlighting again this transition into the 8th, it's asking you to have those sort of maybe uncomfortable conversations. And again, it could be just around finances. It could be just those uncomfortable things you have to talk about, in terms of family issues as well. But it could be a more intimate thing with your partner or someone other, something that has to be delved into, that is maybe, uncomfortable, but is necessary at this point, I would say. And because Saturn is continuing to retrograde in your 8th house, opposite all these planets in your 2nd house, don't shirk away from it, but also don't maybe overemphasize it either, that there are basic needs that you have to have met first, very basic security needs that you need to meet before you delve into any kind of, processing any of these more complex things that are coming up for you to deal with in August. So as I mentioned, Venus will backtrack into your sign by the 7th. And a couple of weeks later, we have Mars move into your 3rd host sign by the 18th. And then a couple of days after that, we have on the 23rd, we have Mercury station retrograde. So we have an interesting thing going on by the end of August. And that is, we have all of the planets moving retrograde, or in the case of Jupiter, are preparing to move retrograde, except for Mars. Mars is the only planet that's not moving backwards. It's moving forwards in your 3rd host sign by the 23rd. It's the only planet really moving full steam ahead. So Mars in your 3rd sign, they do go hand in hand, Mars and the 3rd sign. They're very much alike. 3rd sign is very much about getting what you want, expressing what you want, being very clear about that. And Virgo is very exacting and very good at being clear about things usually. However, there's a complex here. Obviously, the complex here is that Mercury is retrograde. The other complex here is that Mars is opposite Neptune in Pisces. And so although Mars, the part of you that is Mars, the kind of more creative, expressive, also very practical, work-orientated part of you that wants to do something, is very sort of strategic, perhaps, and orderly and planning in the 3rd house. I want this and I'm going to go for this. Because it's opposite Neptune and Mercury is retrograde, there's a lot of confusion around the details here. And that might be frustrating. And that's important that you don't take your frustrations out on other people, or you don't bury your frustrations and take them out on yourself. And that's an issue again with Mars and Virgo also. It's like it's having to think too much about details and red tape, and it kind of gets frustrated. Gets frustrated because Mars is a part of you that just wants to express and do something and just do it. And in Virgo, it cannot just do it. It has to think a lot about it and think about all the things around it. And now with Mercury retrograde, it's having to do that even more. It's having to consider other people also. And it's also not very clear about it because it's opposite Neptune. And Neptune in your 9th house, by the way, essentially itself is not clear, perhaps. It's kind of creating a possibility, a dreamlike state of, I'm not really sure about what is true anymore. But that could be confusing for one, and then for another person, that could be, well, that's an opportunity. If I'm not really sure about what I believe anymore, maybe I can, think about things differently. Maybe I can dream up something else. Maybe my beliefs could do with a bit of a shake up, and maybe blurring of the lines is not a bad thing, because I can start to think of things in a different way, and new possibilities can come into my life. It's just that with Mars in the mix here, which in Virgo likes to be very clear about things and exacting, it's just not able to be. And yet its need is to be. So this could be something of a frustration here. And essentially what we're having is all of these faster moving planets, Venus, Mercury, Mars, Sun, all of these moving through your 1st, 2nd, 3rd, very personal, like I want. This is me. This is what I want. Opposite all these other planets, Pluto, Saturn, Neptune. And it's like, well, you can't have that. Or that's not possible. Maybe that's kind of like a no-go. Or no, you wanted it that way. You're going to have to do it this way. And let's open up to a new possibility of doing it, because you're not really clear about what that is anyway. So it's definitely complex having all of these planets opposite each other, but it's also opening up an opportunity, as I said, for you to think about it differently. Jupiter itself will actually station by the beginning of September. And it will do so at the very same degrees that Mercury was retrograde in April and May. And so Jupiter for the rest of the year, and I'll talk about it in September, in your 10th house of career, obviously there's a whole reassessment of why you do anything, what gives your life meaning and purpose. And that's a big longer term impact around work that you're going to have to think a lot about over the next few months until the very end of the year, before Jupiter stations direct again and is clear about moving forward with this new sort of sense of meaning and purpose in what you're doing in life. So it could be a whole change of direction in life, in a sense, into September. And in a way, August is setting it up. And I think if you are open to that and open to the setup and slow down and pay attention to all of these things that have to be worked out and reworked more so and reviewed, then those bigger term themes of Jupiter from September to the end of the year around your work plans, and again, even just your direction in life, can be more rewarding. You won't get so frustrated if you get, this sense of my life is going in a different direction now. If you're open to that in August, and that August is really kind of opening up new possibilities in a sense. And sometimes it maybe is also a possibility of looking back for an opportunity, of looking back at things instead of moving gung-ho ahead with new things. I don't think August is, in a way, into September, a great time for moving ahead with brand new things and new projects and just starting them off brand new, because everything is moving retrograde. Everything is asking you to go back over something. At least then also think about going back and doing something you did before, perhaps. So, Cancer, I hope that's been of help. I did want to mention just one other thing before I finish it, and that's the new moon by the middle of the month on the 16th of August. So if we go back here on the 16th, it's the very last degree of Cancer. So it is, in one way, well, first of all, it's the second new moon in your sign in as many months. So it's definitely like a fresh new beginning for you, Cancer, in many ways. But because this is the very last degree of Cancer, it's a bit complex. It's a new moon, and so a new month, of course, and it's a new fresh start for you. But with everything else that's going on and this last degree of Cancer, it's asking you to really look at, what are you attached to? What thoughts are you attached to? And ideas, even thinking about the longer term picture here now as well, is going to be important, because whatever it is that you want and that you have to redo and approach in a completely different way, this kind of middle of the month period is kind of this pivot in terms of actually what ideas, what thoughts am I attached to, and maybe can I think about things in a different way, and and shake that up a bit, right? And to think about these things is to be open to the unexpected and unexpected changes, as this new moon is, though, kind of very sort of attached in a way. It's this lunar mansion is very much about attachment issues and thinking about, the ideas, not just the people and things and feelings that makes us feel attached to other people. It's also about the thoughts. We attach the thoughts and ideas and beliefs as well. So in a way, this is kind of like setting it up for bigger changes happening down the line. But I think it's important to highlight this now by the middle of August, in terms of maybe loosening those bonds, loosening those, those bonds around those ideas that you have that are, again, maybe could do with a bit of loosening. Maybe that there's a shakeup that is required here so that you can see your life, see yourself in a very different way. So, Cancer, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Leo rising and or moon sign for August 2023. So, Leo, your ruler, the sun, moves through your 12th host sign for the first couple of weeks until August 16th, and then moves into your sign. And this is a lot more energy, a lot more vitality, and a lot more enthusiasm coming into your life by mid-August onwards, more so. Now, it isn't to say that you haven't had those of late, except for the fact that Saturn was opposing all of these planets in your sign. So you've had Mars move through Leo, Mercury is moving through Leo now, Venus has moved into Leo and is retrograding back out of Leo by the first week of August. So a lot of attention on your sign. In fact, probably the most attention of any sign really in the month of August. And that is good in many ways, but in other ways, it's a challenge, because Mars although a great powerful planet for you, it rules your fourth and ninth house, and there's definitely a sense of, a purposefulness about this and some enjoyments that are potential here. It's also in opposition to Saturn and the other. And so there can be some restriction from coming from another, coming from any other, or coming from some situation or other. So the exact opposition of Mars Saturn has now passed, at least, and so that's moving on, but it's still there hanging around. What you're going to deal with eventually, though, by the end of August and into the beginning of September, is an opposition between your ruler, the Sun, and Saturn, and that's a lot more complex in many ways, and in a way, it's potentially even more of an identity crisis more than anything else, because the Sun in Leo, though strong, so I'll just bring it forward and I'll show you it first. The Sun in Leo. So the Sun in Leo is, in its own sign, it's strong, it's feeling very much at home, and all of that's great, except for Saturn is opposite, and it's in its own sign, and it's also feeling very strong, and it's retrograde, so it's even stronger in a way, and it's more impactful. And so with these opposite now, though there might be a strength of sense of self and clear direction, which is potentially not have been there of late, because the Sun has been transiting through your 12th whole sign. That's not as clear, and also more especially with Sun in your 12th opposite Pluto in your 6th sign, potentially not very clear about where you're going and the direction your life is taking. So that's one good thing. The Sun is in your sign now, so that's all good. But opposite Saturn, Saturn-Sun oppositions can be very conflicted in many ways, because even though they're in a strong position, both are in very strong positions, you might be conflicted in terms of, I feel confident about this, but I have this kind of limitation here, or this pushback from someone or something. And it might question you, and you might then question yourself. And to the extreme, like I said, the more extreme expression of that is an identity crisis, an existential crisis even. It's like, what am I doing? Well, what am I about? Well, where am I going? So for you, Leo, I think this is going to play out more so in your relationship, obviously, because it's the 1st and 7th. But it also might play out in your everyday life, in what you're doing in your everyday, and whether or not what you're doing is working anymore, and perhaps it's not working, and maybe you need to rethink the whole thing. So that's the kind of bigger theme, the biggest theme really essentially for you, Leo, throughout the month of August. And there's so much emphasis on your sign. You can see here the Sun and the Moon. We've just had a new moon on the 16th at the very last degree of Cancer, which itself is a transition into your sign, but also a complex time, because you don't really have that clarity as yet. It's not forthcoming until the Sun is settled into your sign. So here you see by the 17th of August, the Sun is just about to move into Leo, but itself is kind of hanging out between two signs, and it's very unclear at this stage. So it might take a few days, in other words, to kind of get that clarity. But with so much emphasis on you, and at the same time, this need to be addressing the other and your partner, more especially, having their own needs, which you have to really consider, and the long-term implications of anything that you do right now in a more immediate time frame, and the implications that has on your relationship. This is important to acknowledge in August, Leo. By the 18th, the end of the 18th into the 19th, we have Mars move into Virgo. So it's out of its stronger position, Leo, but it's also out of an opposition to Saturn. So that's potentially more beneficial. Now, instead of Mars having an aspect from Rahu in Aries, your 9th whole sign, Mars is instead sending its aspect onto Aries with Rahu therein. And so this is, a stronger transit in many ways, but it's also potentially more conflicted in many other ways. So Rahu itself has been shaking things up in your 9th sign, asking you to really change the way you believe things are. Let's face it, the world has been going through that anyway, but we can see that in so many people's charts anyway, that it's really shaking up the 9th house. And what essentially that means is we are being shown things, we've been seeing things that changes our beliefs. And it's not easy to change our beliefs, especially with Rahu in the 9th house, and yet we have to. And now with Mars in your second house aspecting the ninth house, and again, Mars no longer restricted by either Saturn or Rahu. Mars really wants to push ahead and just say what it wants to say and do what it wants to do, and without much forethought. But the thing is, if you do that, it's going to create problems, because Mars in Virgo, although again, it's the only planet at this point, by the way, that's not either retrograde or slowing down to retrograde, and it's gung-ho about moving forward. However, because it's in Virgo, it's too analytical for Mars. It's too caught up in red tape. It has to rethink and rethink everything that it's doing and planning. So you really do have to think around these issues. Now, it could be around home issues and family and parents and all of that, because Mars represents those things for you. It could be around home and travel, all of that linked with finances now. And so there might be some issue here around finances and travel and home situations going on. Children as well are implicated because of its aspect. So just thinking about, I guess, finances, home life, all of these things, and not getting too bogged down and caught up in red tape, I would say, because, well, you're likely to, but not get frustrated with that, I would say, because it could literally end up with that, because by the time Mercury then stations retrograde by the 23rd, it's obviously pulling back on that Mars in Virgo wanting to move ahead. And Mercury retrograde in your sign also as ruler of your second sign and 11th sign is very much about finances. So you're then having to go and rejig, refinance, reassess all of your financial sphere. And this could be potentially frustrating. It could be potentially conflicted with other people. The fact that Mars now is also opposite Neptune in your 8th house, in your second house, Mars, this is like not really being sure about what to do, actually, or not being able to plan something because it's these kind of unforeseen circumstances and vague sense of what, is happening. You're not really sure. It's all kind of up in the air. All of the planets, like I said, now are either retrograde or preparing to. Jupiter itself will prepare to retrograde by the beginning of September. So Mars is the only thing moving forward. And at the same time, like I said, because it's opposite Neptune and it's in Virgo and Mercury's retrograde, you just might not be clear about the details. So a lot of patience required at this point. In terms of anything financial, any kind of family dynamics, and potentially both of those combined, that could be really conflicted and complicated if you're having to deal with some financial issue with your family. Or if it was for traveling or home situation or anything like that, or with your children, there's definitely some things you have to work out here. So Venus at this point has also started to move back, and it will move back actually the first week. Let me go back to the first week. So it will enter its combustion. And so Venus is not visible at this point, and therefore you can't see Venus. So Venus represents your career, your life direction in that sense, and your clarity about, what you're doing. Third and 10th Lord in the 12th house is not very clear, especially retrograde and combust, not visible. So you might add this to all of the other things I mentioned, and it just adds another layer of complexity and uncertainty into your life in August. I would say more than anything, Leo, if you can take on this as a way of really shaking it up for yourself and not being too dogmatic or rigid on whatever's happening right now, that actually it's loosening a lot of things for you that could lead to many things that are very positive. But if you just try and keep things the way they are when things are really being changed in a big way, it could be very frustrating for you when things don't pan out the way you want them to. So Venus continues to retrograde in your 12th house until September 4th, at which point Jupiter actually will station retrograde in Aries, aspected by the Mars and all of that. And so that would be the whole other sort of, while Mercury continues to retrograde in your sign, actually the Jupiter retrograde from September right to the end of the year is emphasizing where Mercury was previously retrograde in April, May. So whatever you have to go back over again, you're going to be really going back over in a big way for the rest of the year, and really reevaluating your whole approach to the ninth house, which is essentially your higher mind, your philosophy, your belief systems, your guiding principles, what you believe to be true. And Jupiter retrograde here, where Mercury once was, with Rahu and Uranus and all that, having shaken all of this up for the last, year, over a year with Rahu, a few years with Uranus. This Jupiter retrograde in this sign, which I'll talk more about, of course, in September, till the end of the year, is asking you to really change your perspective in a big way. Change what you see as possible. I think there's so much change going on for you, Leo, that I think even more than any other sign in a way. And it begins in August. But if you're to open to this and embrace the changes and see them as positive and necessary, I think there's great potential here also. I just wanted to mention the lunar phases. So we have a full moon in your sixth sign beginning the month on the 1st of August, and a full moon in your seventh sign the very last day of August, 31st. So we're starting with a full moon and ending with a full moon. And in a way, it bookmarks or bookends the month of August in a more intense way with full moons in your sixth and seventh sign. And it highlights also the transition from sixth to seventh and themes of Pluto in the sixth and Saturn in the seventh. And these aren't easy themes necessarily, but they're necessary. And Pluto in your sixth is very much about changing your habits, your day-to-day habits, how you approach life and what you're doing. Saturn retrograde in your seventh is asking you to reconsider your relationships and your significant relationship in particular. And a full moon beginning out in your sixth house and finishing out in your seventh, this is really highlighting this like kind of conflict that can lead to a resolution if again you're open to another way of doing it, another way of approaching it. And again, thinking about the long-term consequences and not just thinking about the short-term, you know, instant gratification that these other transits, opposite in Cancer, Leo, and Virgo, all represent here. Because there really, in a way, isn't any short-term relief. There isn't any short-term gratification in another way. I mean, if it is, it's very short-lived. And then you reconsider it immediately. And then you consider the longer-term implications and the impact that it has on your life and in your relationship, especially. So I would say really slow down, I would say, is what I would say for August. And consider and reconsider and rethink and redo and review practically everything in your life. And in a way, like I said, even though the only thing that's not going under major review is Mars, because it's in Virgo, and again, Mercury retrograde, it still is implicated. So you're having to review all your plans moving forward, whether it's around home life or travel or whatever, or around your parents, or again, just generally the direction your life is taking. Because when you ever have the four corners of the chart, 1, 4, 7, 10, and its rulers retrograde, which is the case here or implied here, all of your life feels like it's like, not clear. Your direction is not very clear right now. But again, I would say use that as a positive sort of redirection of your energy and your goals and your ambitions and your life and your relationships and yourself, and just redo everything. This is a time of reinvention, I think, more than anything else. So I think with the sun coming into your sign by mid-August to mid-September, this is an opportunity to use the energy of the sun, no matter how restricted it might be by Saturn, but even to use that restriction as a refocusing mechanism so that you can reinvent yourself. So that's my take on Leo for August 2023. I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Virgo rising and or moon sign for August 2023, Virgo, we're heading into a complex month in August, and I think you're going to feel this in a way that perhaps brings up a lot of uncertainty, and clarity might not be forthcoming from the get-go. And this is something just to be mindful of, to embrace these transits in a way that allows you to open up to other ways of seeing things, of doing things, of channeling these energies in a way that is more helpful without being too dogmatic or rigid about them, to try and keep an open mind about everything that's happening, because I think August is opening things up in different ways that allows for things to change in so many ways. All of the planets, nearly all bar one, are either retrograde or preparing to retrograde in August. So it's kind of asking you to slow down and pay attention. And Mercury, it's going to go retrograde, your ruler, by the end of August. I'll talk about that. And it will backtrack through your 12th house, where Venus has already begun its backtracking. And so the 12th house, being implicated here. 8th house is very strong. 6th house, all of these things are really strongly incorporated into the complexity of August. These are all very hidden places of your chart and therefore of your life where it might not seem very clear as to how to progress. And I guess with retrogrades, at any rate, it's about moving within and finding the strength within and making the changes within without maybe seeing the obvious changes that are necessary without. So as the saying goes, as within, so without. I think these transits are pointing you inwards more so. But if you resist that and try and put all your attention outward and try and fix things or sort things out immediately, then you're likely to be frustrated with the setbacks that are likely. If, on the other hand, you all of your attention goes inward to really make the changes, these internal changes that ultimately change your life, I think this could be very helpful. So we begin the month with a full moon on the 1st of August in your 5th host sign, and it's with Pluto. And then we end the month with another full moon on the 31st of August in your 6th host sign with Saturn. So there's a transition happening here with, in between that, a new moon on the 16th in your 11th host sign. And as planets line up on one side, and we have Saturn and Pluto on the other, we have the faster moving Sun, Venus, Mars, Mercury, your ruler, all lining up in Cancer, Leo, and Virgo, as Mars moves into Virgo as well. All of these really highlight this sort of faster moving, more immediate sort of time frame that has to be kind of balanced with the bigger picture, essentially. And this full moon on the 1st and the full moon on the 31st kind of bookends, I guess, the month of August in a way to highlight these bigger themes and implications. And I don't think you're going to be able to get away with doing anything in August without thinking about the long-term implications and consequences of your actions. Saturn in the 6th house retrograde itself is asking you to redo things and not to approach your life the same again. It's asking you to get rid of habits, bad habits, ideally, but anything that is in the way or blocking your ability to function well every day. And of course, Virgo, you are the natural 6th sign of the zodiac. So it's all about bettering yourself, improving yourself and your day-to-day life. So Saturn in your 6th now in Aquarius is asking you to shake it up. And so try not to resist the impulse to shake things up, to change your routine. If you were to resist, which is also potential here because Aquarius is resisting, you could then end up with some more of an issue here because it's again asking you to change. And if you cannot change that easily, it's going to force the changes eventually. That's Saturn retrograde in your 6th. Again, ending with that full moon. So that might bring the highlight those bigger themes by the end of the month. The beginning of the month is moon in the 5th with Pluto, and it's asking you to look at your life differently. And when I mean look at your life, look at your future differently, what you see is possible in the future. And Pluto here is asking you to remove blocks to that potentiality, that you can remove what stands in the way of getting to where you want to be, to making the plans that you want. And Saturn, like I said, again, is about the steps that are required, the daily steps that you need to, actually walk to get to where you want to go, essentially. And all of those are that's the bigger picture. Whereas again, in the immediate time frame, you have the 11th and 12th houses implicated here in a big way in terms of, give and take, wanting something, ambitions and goals in life, but also having to surrender a lot here as well. So with so many planets in your 12th house of surrender, opposite Saturn, and aspected by Rahu and Jupiter, all of that from your 8th house, you're really having to surrender to the unknown at this stage, Virgo, I would say. And it might be really perplexing and confusing and annoying and all of that. But at the same time, I think there is greater potential here when you open up to new possibilities, thinking about things in a whole different way, opening your mind up to just different ways of doing things. And so 8th house and 12th house in particular is very much, a more spiritual orientation, having that kind of, I think, the more practical orientation of spirituality. Because again, if you're throwing all your energy out there, trying to like fix this and that in your world around you, that is kind of, for me, a kind of misdirection of energy. Whereas when you think about spiritual life as the most practical, in a sense, understanding the inner dynamics, everything on the outer then lines up with that. And so there's no conflict there, really. when you've dealt with that inner conflict in yourself. And I mentioned this as well in particular because we have Mars move into your sign by the 18th. So I'll just show you this here. So at this point, the sun has moved into your 12th sign. Venus has moved back in the first week of August into your 11th sign. And it's really asking you to review a lot of things that you hold dear and your beliefs around what you think is possible and your ambitions for the long haul. The sun then moves into your 12th sign, and again, asking you to surrender many of those things. Because in a way, if you think about it, you cannot actually, it's like you need to let go to get something. You need to trust in the process and letting go in order for you to actually achieve something. Holding on too tightly, and that's maybe one of the issues with Virgo, is this kind of sense of I need to try harder, I need to do better, I need to improve myself constantly. But in the pursuit of perfection, you actually can actually make things less so. You can actually make things worse. You can actually, it's like when you have an illness and you attack it head on, or there's a problem in your life and you're trying to solve it straight away. Whereas if you were just to leave it, it would just sort itself out. And I'm not saying that you want to just take these transits and just lie down and not do anything. Absolutely, there's a lot to do here, but there's a lot to redo and rethink your approach to how you do them, and to be open to the unexpected and not to be expecting anything bad, but to expect something good to come out of all of this, despite how uncertain it might feel. So Mars, as I mentioned, is moving into your sign Virgo, and Mars is not the easiest planet for you to deal with, and Mars doesn't like being in Virgo in general. And now it's especially the case because Mars in Virgo is opposite Neptune. And in a few days after this, on the 23rd, Mercury, your ruler, goes retrograde into the 12th. So this is complex because it, on the one hand, shows a need to kind of plan and strategize and put something in place to kind of move forward with something you want here. But on the other hand, anything you do is kind of probably going to be met with sort of delays and frustrations and setbacks, and you know, and it's not maybe very clear anyway, because Mars opposite Neptune isn't clear, and Mercury retrograde in the 12th is certainly not clear. So it's an ending phase in a way, August, for you, Virgo. And I think if you again think about surrender and allowing to be, not just giving up, allowing is allowing something to be. And so allowing it to be more. And instead of constraining it or constricting it so that it can often feel like less, or you're not getting where you want to as quickly as you want to, I think it could be a great opening for you to be more spiritually orientated, again, is what I'm saying here. But again, if you don't, you know, identify, or you don't like the word spiritual, or you don't think it's practical, just think about your inner life is so rich at the moment that why not delve into that and think about the adjustments that can be made here. And then when planets then, as they always do, begin to move forward again, and when things come clear, you're hitting the ground running at that point because you've lined up everything in yourself and everything just runs smoothly. And so think about that in any kind of way in your daily life as well. How maybe you incorporate daily practices that incorporate this kind of rest and retreat and review and reassessment of your life, in that you can then, once they move forward, start to use that energy. It's almost like winding up a spring. You know, I get a sense about these transits more than anything for you, Virgo, that it's, you know, when you wind up a toy and you have to wind it up and wind it up, and you feel the tension build up in the spring before you let it loose. This is kind of what this is like. And with Mars going forward, and the only planet at this stage really moving forward, Jupiter itself is about to station retrograde into the beginning of September. So Mars moving forward in your sign, it's like you have that kind of spring-loaded kind of impetus to move forward. But if you haven't lined up everything around that, it could feel like you're just, you know, bashing off everything. Essentially, you've got all this energy to move forward and everything is just lined up against you. So that is essentially because all the planets bar Mars are retrograde. So I would say, just again, think about that as an analogy for yourself, and what do you do with that energy, that pent up energy, and find an outlet for it, and make sure that you don't, again, just crash into all these different hurdles that are coming your way, and instead kind of negotiate them and reassess your approach to these things. And again, for me, that's more about lining up with the inner stuff first. So that is the month of August. Virgo, most definitely a complex month, not just for your sign, but for all signs. But certainly for your sign, I think that it's definitely a more hidden aspect that might not play out in any obvious way. And indeed, it might. It might play out in obvious ways in terms of, dealing with other people and uncertainties around change with other people, or in your life in general, and in any way. But whatever it is, it's about looking within in yourself and finding that within you have the answers. All the answers are all lined up for you. So, Virgo, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Libra rising and or moon sign for August 2023. So Libra, your ruling planet Venus is retrograde now at this point, moving back to the beginning of Leo, and will backtrack actually into Cancer from your 11th whole sign to your 10th whole sign and enter combustion. So it will disappear into the rays of the sun in August. We won't see Venus. We won't see your ruling planet. You might feel a bit burnt out at this point in many ways. You might feel like recent activities, which might have felt very busy in many ways, but also, a lot of things to review and change itself is tiring. When you think about when we make changes, it's tiring. If we just keep going the same way we're going, like we spare a lot of energy because we just kind of get into habitual patterns, and it doesn't take as much energy to do those things. But because you're having to go through so much changes right now, um, that might feel a bit exhausting. So in a way, I think August is a time to kind of take that time out in a way to allow for this combustion, for this burnt out sense, to kind of think about it more as a purification period in your life. And when you're going through a purification process, you know, it's like if you're going on a detox, you obviously know you have to give yourself a bit of leeway. You're not going to be pushing ahead and doing as much as you would normally do. You would have to give yourself some downtime to recuperate after a detox. So think about that as a detox. So as Venus goes back from your 11th to your 10th, it's about, I guess, in a way, detoxifying your goals in life and what you're doing and where your life is going in a more professional sense, perhaps, but in any kind of which way, anything that you're doing, any kind of action that you're taking now, why do you do those things? We all do things because we think we're going to gain from it, and we usually do gain from what we do. But what are we gaining from it? You know, and that could be financial gains, of course. That's the more obvious expression of the 11th house. But it's anything you gain. It's like any friendship you gain, any connection, any network that you gain from like being more proactive in your public sphere. But it's also any kind of action that you take, and if you're to take actions that bring gains in terms of knowledge, or gains in terms of ideas, or in terms of anything, any kind of gains at all. And that's the reassessment that is underway now. Reassessing what you're getting out of what you're doing. What you're getting out of is the 11th house, and what you're doing is the 10th house. So as Venus goes backwards by the 7th of August into your 10th house and conjoins the sun, in this case, then is combust, and it's moving from the evening star, the bright evening star, and it will return by the end of August as the bright morning star. Again, go into this process of purification, I would say, Libra, in terms of, again, what you're doing and in your career and that in a sense, but also personally, just going through that process of purification about your goals in life and where your life is going, the direction your life is taking now, because obviously it's taking a different direction. I mean, I think that's clear. Even though it might not feel clear right now, because again, there's no clarity as such. When we can't see Venus, we're not as clear about our direction. And for you, Libra, that's certainly the case. That's the potential, at least, that you might not be as clear about what you're doing. But again, from clarity comes certainty, from doubt comes knowledge, and eventually you can get clear about this and move forward and with your plans. Now, of course, the other thing is that all the planets, nearly all of them, except for Mars, are going retrograde. And Mars, though it's not retrograde, it's going to move into Virgo, your 12th sign, and oppose Neptune. And then Mercury will go retrograde, ruling Virgo. So there's a lot of sort of setbacks in anything you're doing anyway. So it's probably not the best time to be just gung-ho and going forward and doing anything anyway, or at least starting something new. Because yes, you could start something new, but then it has so many hurdles in place that it would be just an uphill struggle in a way. So why not use the time to reassess and review all the things that you're doing? Again, whether it's career or not, or whatever it is you're doing. So Venus, like I said, is meeting the sun. It will return to Cancer, your 10th sign, which is opposite Pluto, where we have the full moon on the 1st of August. And the sun opposite Pluto has been a theme, of course. Venus opposite Pluto is a returning theme now. And there could be some power struggles going on here for sure. There's some maybe home dynamics and work dynamics that need to be worked out. But as planets also line up in Leo, we have them opposite Saturn. So Venus has been opposite Saturn. It's now gone back to opposite Pluto. Mercury is opposite Saturn. Mars opposite Saturn. This is another dynamic that's going on in terms of anything that you're doing and the gains that you achieve from that. It's like, well, what do you want to do? That's the bigger question. And the bigger questions are always asked by Saturn. What do you want to do? What are the long-term goals here and implications, the consequences behind anything that you do? What plans are you making for your future? And maybe you need to rethink these because Saturn is retrograde, and Saturn is retrograde opposite Neptune, or sorry, opposite Mercury, which itself is going to go retrograde. So it's really rethinking all of your plans and what you think is possible, and redoing everything in essence. And although that's every sign's sense really in August, for you it's more about home life, work life, creative expression, and planning in the future, and also gains from what you're doing, whether it's financial or otherwise. Your relationships are obviously going through, and have been going through for over a year now, a lot of complex changes that might not be so obvious as all these other changes that are going on because of the nodes. The nodes don't usually bring a lot of clarity initially, but they also bring a lot of change, and more change perhaps because of that, because it's not quite clear, and because it feels like it's fated or it's outside of your control. There's a lot of change that happens that seems outside of your control. But I would say just be mindful of it, that there's a necessary evolution that has to occur now. It has been occurring for over a year now in you and in your relationships, and for your partner or partners also, and any significant other really. And that is Rahu in your 7th house, of course, and Jupiter, Uranus continuing through here. Jupiter will actually station by the beginning of September and move backwards through your 7th house. So there's a whole review process that will begin then. And in the meantime, Mercury will go retrograde. And the last Mercury retrograde actually occurred in Aries, where Jupiter will go retrograde for the rest of the year from September to the end of December. So there's a whole process of reflection and review and reassessment on, your relationships and how you're approaching conflict within your relationships, and how you state what you want in the relationship and find more balance in your relationship, because it hasn't been as balanced of late, I would imagine, Libra, because there's been so much emphasis on the other and not a lot of emphasis on you, with Ketu moving through your sign. We've only got 3 more months of Ketu moving through Libra, and that's August, September, October. And so because of that, I think it's important to address this, and always the case with Ketu anyway. It's kind of like it always brings it at the tail end as it moves back to the beginning of the sign. It kind of really emphasizes the themes. And so I guess, not neglecting yourself, but going deeper into yourself and understanding yourself more, and therefore changing your perspectives and your relationships to everybody, I would say, is a better approach to the nodes here than feeling lost in that, or feeling like there's so much emphasis on the world out there and things going on, and or people or whatever it is, or your partner, whatever it might be, and that you feel lost in the mix in a way. And it's important that you address Ketu in a more, I would say, healthy way, in terms of going deeper within yourself instead of neglecting yourself. So as I said, Mars will go into Virgo by the 18th, and then a couple of days later on the 23rd, we have Mercury retrograde in Leo. And so therefore, again, we have all the planets except Jupiter, which is about to retrograde, all except Mars retrograde. So Mars is gung ho now, and it wants to go forward. And in Virgo, it's like planning ahead and scheming even, and strategizing even. But at the same time, because Mercury is retrograde and Mars is opposite Neptune in your 6th, it's very hard to plan and have a strategy when Mars is in your 12th house, Virgo, with Mercury retrograde. It just feels like, okay, any plans that you put in place kind of slip away. And it's kind of like trying to plan out a routine in your sleep. Do you know what I mean? It's very hard with Mars in the 12th. It's important, I think, with Mars in the 12th to be really mindful in your relationships, and that you don't burn bridges at this point, but also that you don't take things too personally, I would say, that you recognize that there's maybe a part of you that is almost like a saboteur part of you, an unconscious part of you that is working against your own best interests. And it's not necessarily anyone else that's working against your best interest, no family member or partner. They might they might reflect that to you in a more obvious way, but really it's deep down, it's a sense of your own lack of clarity, I would say, about moving forward, even if it's expressed in their lack of clarity, that it's your partner bringing these issues to you about they're not clear about moving forward, even though they really want to be right now. So that's some lesson for you, I think, Libra, to deal with in terms of being clear about your own objectives here, your own, what's important to you and what's important to both of you, your family, your partner, and you, all of you. How can we, get ahead in this? How can we move ahead with this? And again, like I said, it could be confusing because it's in Virgo, opposite Neptune and Pisces, where it's a bit vague. It's like the details are a bit sketchy, even though Mars in Virgo wants to be, ideally very on it, like really on the details. It also gets very frustrated having to deal with all the details and the red tape. And yet there isn't a lot of clarity around the details. So it's a kind of like, it's a bit of a tricky situation because on the one hand, you have Mars and Virgo, wanting to just get on with something. And even that, if that means planning something, I'm going to plan to do this, even though I can't do it really right now, I'm going to plan to do it. And at the same time, the plans themselves are a bit vague. And so that would frustrate Mars. So the Mars part of you, whether it's again reflected in another or not, is showing this kind of frustration. So just being mindful of that, especially if it comes up in any other kind of subversive way, if it comes out in your dreams or when you're sleeping, or if your sleep is disturbed in any way, that it's waking you to this kind of potential. So that's Mars. Venus continues to retrograde in your sign all August. Again, combust until the 22nd. So at least now at this point, by the end of August, the last few days, until it stations direct on September 4th. It's still retrograde, but it's at least visible in as a bright morning star. This is actually one of the more complicated phases of it, and this is something to be mindful of, because when Venus returns to the sky, it's no longer combust, but yet it's still moving backwards. It's kind of like, yeah, okay, I went through that purification process and I'm kind of like clearer now about what I want to do, but it's still retrograde. That's all I would say. It's still retrograde till September 4th. So just maybe hold off on making that plan to do anything very definitive. Certainly any important decision making, and I would highlight not to make any important decisions around work at this time, for example, or any kind of financial decisions, any signing on the dotted line around any kind of project or anything that you're doing, just to be a bit more open about it for another week or so. And then by the time it stations, then you can go ahead and make your plans. So Libra, a complex month, as I've been saying to all of the signs, it is a complex time, August, but with this awareness, I hope that it can help you navigate these complex transits. And as always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time, for Scorpio rising and or moon sign for August. So Scorpio, Mars, your ruler, is in your 10th house sign in Leo, and that would ordinarily be a very positive thing. And I'm sure it is in some way, but it's also very conflicted because it's opposite Saturn in your 4th house sign. So there's this tension that's been building and has been building to a crescendo really into the end of July. And in August, it might ease up somewhat, and that's great. But for the first couple of weeks of August, till the 18th of August, in fact, Mars is still opposite Saturn. So Mars in Leo, it wants to be gung-ho about things. It's very determined to do something, to take action. But with Saturn opposite, it's not really allowed to. It's not allowed free reign. And that you might say is a good thing, because if you cannot do things, if it's your rising sign Scorpio and you physically cannot do something because maybe this is so tense that you even like have that kind of tension in your body that you can't do it. Or if it's your moon sign and it's just there's a general sense of tension in whatever you're doing. Again, think about it as an opportunity to focus on what you're doing. Because actually, if everything were possible and you could do anything, you might not do anything, in fact. But with Saturn opposite Mars, your ruler in your 10th house from your 4th house, it's kind of like, yeah, you need to stay here and do this and finish this. And I think it could be a good time for finishing something, in fact, to get very focused on something you're doing, like really hyper focused on finishing the details. Now, when Mars goes into Virgo, as I'll show now by the 18th of August, then it's going to get really focused on details in Virgo. But because Mercury, a few days later on the 23rd of August, is going to retrograde in your 10th sign, whatever it is you have been doing, has to go through a major review from the end of August. So whatever you're doing, whatever you're working on right now, and I hope you have something to work on, to focus on, make sure that you're open-minded about it, because it has to then go through a whole review process. Venus itself is already under review because it's retrograde in your 10th sign as well. Like, there's so much emphasis on Leo in August that if you're not paying attention to your work and what you're doing, whether it's career or just what you're doing in general, you could slip up. And even like I said, in terms of if this is your rising sign, physically what you're doing, just pay attention to things, the actions that you're taking, and that you just go slow and do things very sort of systematically and focused, in a very focused, deliberate way. Venus, though, is different. It's about relationships, and it's about hidden dynamics that you might not be really on board with. And so there are a lot of things to rework here, reassess, and your partner might be going through their own reassessment and own review that both of you have to go through together in terms of what you're doing together and where your life is taking you together. So I guess being open to, negotiating and renegotiating some things here. There's a lot to renegotiate. Venus will actually backtrack into your 9th house, into Leo, by the 7th, and it'll enter combustion. So the sun is in your 9th house the first 2 weeks, and 10th house second 2 weeks. So it's really highlighting this sort of transition, this back and forth between the 9th and 10th. These are very powerful houses when you have any link between the two, and it shows very purposeful action, very deliberate, purposeful, like, this is meaningful to me and I want to do this. But because Venus is going backwards through the signs from the 10th to the 9th, as opposed to the other way around, it's asking you to look at what you've already done and ask you to then maybe reconsider how you approach it and to renegotiate, the details around that. Maybe to think about in terms of your relationship, in terms of what do you hope to get out of anything you do? Like, why is it you do anything? Anything that you do is done because you think it's purposeful. That's essentially why anyone does anything. That's the 9th house leading to the 10th house. But again, because it's going backwards with Venus and implicating your partner, especially with your partner or relationships, why is it you did that thing? That might be the question that you'll be asking. Either way, it's still the same questions in terms of why do you do what you do? What is it? What is it that you want from it? Like, what is the meaning behind this? What's the purpose of this? So that's Venus retrograde in your 9th house. That continues until September 4th. And even though it returns to the early morning sky by 22nd of August, so the end of August into the 4th of September, it's a tricky time also because Venus reappears. And so this is kind of, okay, I've gone through that process of reflection and purification essentially in my relationship. And, I hope, you haven't questioned your partner too much or appreciated them and all of that enough so that you can both come through this smiling. But if you cannot, that there might be some, okay, when I did that, okay, let's think about why that happened and let's talk about this and let's have this out. And that last phase, especially up until September 4th, from the end of August, might be a time to really consider these things and to think long and hard about them. Now, as Mars continues to move through Leo, and only for another week or so, by the 18th, it'll move into Virgo. It at least moves out of its opposition to Saturn. So that's great. So even though it was in a way happy in Leo, a fiery sign that suits its dynamic, there are some more positive transits coming in by the end of August in many ways, despite the complexity. And that is because the sun moves into Leo, your 10th house sign, in its own sign. Very powerful position. That's great. It really highlights that, really emphasizes what you're doing. Your work life is very much emphasized. And then Mars goes into Virgo. And although Mars isn't really happy in Virgo, it's at least out of the way of Saturn. So instead of Mars being restricted by Saturn and Rahu, it now actually is given free rein in a way to aspect Rahu in Aries, its own sign, your 6th sign. So there's definitely something that you're able to overcome here and to plan and strategize. I would say, Scorpio, I would say more than most signs that this could be a very positive thing for you to overcome some block here. However, I would say as well that there are other things to negotiate here, because a few days after this, Mercury goes retrograde. So Mercury retrograde from the 23rd in your 10th sign, with the sun in your 10th sign, opposite Saturn in your 4th sign. There's so much to have to redo here and review that if you think you can just plow ahead with Mars, even though that's what Mars likes to do in your plans right now and your ambitions, something's going to trip you up then. So instead of thinking about, I'm just going to plan ahead or I'm just going to plow ahead without planning, I would say slowly, slowly plow ahead and look back at what you're doing. Keep looking back at what you're doing, because Mercury retrograde in Leo is asking for that. And the sun opposite Saturn in Leo is asking for that. It's asking you to find that, okay, this is what I do. This is how I do it. This is me. Okay, great. But maybe is there a better way to approach that? Maybe there's a different way you can communicate that. Maybe there's a different way, or maybe there's something else you want entirely. Maybe this isn't what you want. Maybe you can leave space for thinking about doing it not only differently, but doing something completely different. And I think that all of this is a potential. And because you're going through so much other change in your relationship and your work life and your home life, and everything is changing now, especially these key areas like relationships, home, work, everything is changing. So why not be open to the changes and use them for your advantage? Like, use them to your advantage. Think about the changes as more positive for you, that it's opening up some potential and possibility that maybe, you wouldn't have seen otherwise. But certainly it's not a sort of month for continuing as you are, like as you were. It's not one of those months. It's it's do it differently. Think about it differently. So I would say Mars in the 11th sign, Virgo, it can get bogged down in red tape. It can get a bit, not wanting to deal with all of these details. And at the same time, because it's opposite Neptune and Pisces, as it moves into Virgo, it's not even clear about the details anyway. So there's this kind of vague notion about what it is I'm creating here. And I would say, whatever it is you're doing again, and whatever the reasons are, and whatever you want to achieve by what you're doing, and whatever confusion that you have around why you're doing what you're doing. And I think it's, again, an opportunity that if you embrace it that way, it's a different way of looking at it and finding a new way of doing it, or a new thing to do entirely. So Scorpio, I think it's definitely a game changer, I think, this month of August. But I'm saying that for all signs, certainly. But for you, it's very much professional life and home life and every which way in relationships. I want to go back to the beginning because I want to show you the transition of the full moon to the full moon. So the full moon in Capricorn to the full moon in Aquarius. And between those two full moons, we have a new moon in Cancer, the very last degree of Cancer. Again, highlighting that juncture and the transition between 9th and 10th houses. On the 16th of August, that new moon is asking you to, again, think about why you do what you do. What is the meaning behind this? The full moon begins on the 1st of August in Capricorn with Pluto, and we have another full moon on the 31st of August with Saturn in Aquarius. So this transition between these two Saturn signs, third and fourth signs, is not just asking about the purpose and meaning behind what you're doing and your work and your career and your direction in life in general, and your partner's direction in career life and all of that in general. Also, more personally, what do you want? What would make you happy? Third house is very much about what you want. Fourth house, because you think it makes you happy. But, what is happiness also? Thinking about these bigger questions, because Saturn in the fourth house is asking these bigger questions, and the implications here are far reaching, because this kind of happiness isn't instant gratification. Neither Pluto nor Saturn bring that. Although they oppose all these planets that usually do bring instant gratification, the Mars and the Venus and the Mercuries and all of that, in a way, the opposition itself to Saturn in your that fourth house of happiness, is asking you to look at, actually, what would really make me happy for the long term, not right now, not in this immediate time frame, and not by just doing this thing and finding some enjoyment in this thing right now, but actually, what can I build for the long term that builds a solid base of happiness for myself? That's Saturn in the fourth house. And because Saturn is opposing the planets, like I said, and it is retrograde also, and so this ending the month on a full moon with Saturn in the fourth house, Scorpio, I think leading to this is a process of figuring out what that is, and what are the steps that you need to put in place, whatever that might be. And so whether it's around home life, whether it's around your actual home, whether it's around your family life, whether it's your mother, your relationship with her, whether it's your own relationship with your own sense of, mothering yourself, looking after yourself, what does that look like? And what is happiness? And what is happiness um is very different in terms of how you look at it. Where is your orientation? Because Saturn retrograde is asking you to orientate within yourself, that there's an inner joy you can cultivate now, as opposed to looking for happiness out there, because it isn't out there. There's no happiness out there. The happiness out there is fleeting. It's just a temporary experience of something that is transient. But there's also an inner joy that you can cultivate with Saturn retrograde now in your fourth house. And I think that's one of the bigger themes for you, Scorpio, to really orientate yourself around all these more maybe complex transits that are going on right now, to help you sort of ground and station yourself in that kind of sense of that contentment within yourself, that peace more than anything, with Saturn in your fourth. Okay, Scorpio, I hope that's been of help. I wish you all the best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Sagittarius rising and or moon sign for August 2023. So Sagittarius, your ruler Jupiter is going to slow down by the end of August and will prepare to station retrograde by the beginning of September, and will join all the other planets that are retrograde. And in fact, all of the planets are retrograde or about to retrograde by the end of August, except for Mars. Mars is the only planet that's not doing so. And so Mars moving through your ninth house sign, Leo, into your 10th house sign by the 18th of August is a shift from, I guess, the current restrictions that are in place with all the planets in Leo opposite Saturn. And that could potentially be like a good restriction, like, focusing all of these energies. That's great. But in another way, it could be just literally a restriction. I'm thinking more so in terms of travel, perhaps, as an issue here, because third and ninth house. And of course, as Venus also retrogrades in your ninth house, so that could be enjoyable for travel, certainly, and taking in different cultural events and all of that. Venus in the ninth, because there's so much emphasis on Leo with Saturn opposite, it's definitely complex. But with Venus moving back into your eighth house by the 7th of August, we see that here, moving into combustion, so coming together with the sun in your eighth house, it kind of highlights the sort of backtracking from the third and ninth into the second and eighth. And what is the second and eighth in relation to the third and ninth? I mean, it's if the third and ninth were travel and the enjoyments of every day and traveling around, then the second and eighth are all the financial concerns and all the practical aspects of life that give your life some stability in order for you to be able to do that. So, for example, the second house is very much about your bank balance, finances, for you to be able to do the things that you enjoy. Third house. Then the eighth house is very much about support from other people, whether it's a partner or any other, or any even institutional support and financial support. And then the travel. The eighth house also represents change and unexpected change. And then ninth house is that broadening the mind, and oftentimes, as in all the time, change and any kind of challenge to our lives, any changes to our life at all, bring us that kind of sense of clarity once more, and a sense of, what we stand for, what gives our life a sense of meaning and purpose, is often through challenge. It's often through the unexpected things that we've never planned for, we never thought about, and it's those things that end up more meaningful than anything to us in our life eventually. And so these are important things to consider, of course, because of Venus's backtrack from your ninth sign into your eighth sign. As all these planets, the faster movers, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Mars, all line up on one side, while Pluto and Saturn line up on the other in your second and third. So it could also implicate many other relationships as well, in terms of family dynamics and so on, in terms of siblings or neighbors, or dealing with other people in general, versus, again, traveling around, perhaps dealing with the in-laws maybe, or dealing with your father, and all of those things. These are all implicated here as in relationships with these houses. Jupiter is, like I said at the top of this, about to station retrograde by the beginning of September. So it does begin to slow down in August. It will only reach 21 degrees. So it's already at 20 degrees beginning the month. Interestingly, this is the degrees that Mercury was retrograde in April May. So Jupiter will begin to station on the at the 21 degree mark of Aries, go back to 11 degrees by the very last day of the year. So obviously for the next many months now, from September to the end of the year, Sagittarius, you're going to be going through a big reassessment of your plans. You know, whether it's your personal plans or your plans for your children or any kind of plans at all you're making, but also in terms of home and all of that, in terms of when we add this to the travel plans because of Jupiter's aspect and all the emphasis on your ninth sign, when we think about the Saturn in your third sign influencing, in other words, aspecting your fifth sign, there's a lot around making plans here, whether it's travel or any other plans. And so Jupiter retrograde for many months, for the rest of the year, in fact, is a whole reassessment and review of that. And again, because Mercury did this in April, May, that's something to think about in terms of what was going on April, May that you were doing. That is now going to be a big theme moving forward, or moving backwards, maybe in this case, and doing a major review. So let me go forward and show how Mars first moves on the 18th. And then a few days later, on the 23rd, Mercury stations retrograde. So this is somewhat complicated because although Mars, like I said, is the only planet sort of moving forward with any kind of gung-ho force to do something, and Mars likes to do something, it doesn't do things as easily in Virgo because Virgo is all about the details and getting lost and bogged down in red tape. And on top of that, with Mercury stationing retrograde, Mars is getting even further kind of embroiled in red tape. And then on top of that, Mars is opposite Neptune in Pisces, which is then making it confused about the details. So obviously, Sagittarius, this isn't a time to be, I guess, cognizant of that there could be the potential of a bit of confusion here around the details, around your work plans, around what you're doing in general, and what you're planning at this time. And although, again, Mars and Virgo could be said to be good for planning and strategy and strategizing and all of that, it's just not very clear about what plans to make while all the other planets are retrograde, and especially Mars opposite Neptune. But at least Mars is no longer opposite Saturn, and it's no longer aspected by Rahu. So it's not hindered in any way by that. It's just that it has to think about, as it's kind of gung-ho plowing ahead, thinking about looking back and reassessing as you go, I would say. It aspects Aries, your fifth sign, so I think it probably is going to be more gung-ho in a way, in another way, in terms of you making plans moving forward with Mars in your 10th and Jupiter in your 5th. So it's going to be definitely a push to do something, to plan something. So I definitely would consider this is a good time to plan something. But again, because of Mercury retrograde, really consider and reconsider and, you know, everything that you're doing and planning at this time before you actually commit to anything. And of course, because Mercury is retrograde, your 10th lord, as well as your 7th lord, relationships and career and all of that, going through this whole review process, as is the case every few months, really. But this time opposite Saturn, I think with every other retrograde going on, there's a lot to review here and reassess that you know, obviously you need to have a bit of patience around all of this. Saturn itself in your third house, you know, although a very strong position for Saturn, it said, is, you know, retrograde, and it's about rethinking all of that. How do you communicate what you want in the first place? What is it you want? And with the planets opposite in your ninth house, with the sun now from mid-month going into your ninth in a very strong position, you have both of these in such strong positions now. You have the sun in Leo, its own sign, and Saturn in Aquarius, its own sign. And so you're having to balance off all of these things together, where it's like, okay, this is what I want, but this is what's more meaningful. This is what would give me joy in this immediate time frame, but you know that has certain consequences in the long term. And also it has this kind of implication in terms of, well, what do I stand for? What am I about? What gives my life purpose? And maybe it's not that. Maybe I need to approach it in a different way. Maybe I can rethink the way I do this. And again, the implications here, of course, are around not just thinking, but also about planning, around traveling, because of the third and ninth house. And the fifth house as well creative planning, creative thinking around these things, I would say, would be more helpful, and focusing on it in a more positive way, and not, getting bogged down in, what's not working and what needs to be reworked, but thinking about, why you do what you do. If it's meaningful, if you'll find a way, you'll figure it out, right? And that's more important when you think about the sun's strength in Leo, in a very strong position in your ninth house. Again, just with the Mercury retrograde and all of that other retrogrades, you just have to reconsider all the details, because it's just not very clear right now, and it will come clear. You just have to be open to this kind of lack of clarity from the month of August. Let me go back, because I wanted to show you the full moons. We have a full moon on the 1st of August in Capricorn, your second sign, and we have a full moon the very last day of the month, 31st of August, in Aquarius with Saturn. So it's highlighting this shift between your second sign to your third sign, with a full moon starting the month in your second and a full moon in your third sign ending the month. And in the middle of those two, we have a new moon in your eighth sign. So again, second and eighth sign are very much about family dynamics and finances and values, and thinking about more complex topics, I would say, that the second and eighth signs represent, about security and insecurity and change and vulnerability, and having to find a balance between those two things, having to kind of the financial stability to be able to go and take risks, for example, financial risks even. And then versus, the third house then eventually leading to Saturn and this full moon with Saturn, in this sense of, going for something and planning something for the long term that you want, while finding that meaning and purpose in that thing. So the transition from Pluto to Saturn in a way is about overcoming our fears, essentially, from full moon to full moon throughout the month of August. And I think if you overcome the blocks, the fears around the financial blocks, for example, you might have, then you might feel more confident in getting what you want and going for it confidently. But there's no bravado here with the Saturn Sun opposition at all. It's more of a quiet confidence, I would say, more than anything else. So Sagittarius, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time. For Capricorn rising and or moon sign for August 2023. So Capricorn, your ruler Saturn is in your second whole sign, and it's the first whole retrograde in your second whole sign. In 2022, it was a brief retrograde, so it's just a hint at the changes that are happening now. And the changes that are happening, of course, are in relation to your family dynamics and finances. And a Saturn retrograde here can obviously show some delays here, but also a potential for working things out for the long term. And to really put in, I would say, a long-term strategy and plan for your long-term security, I would say, more than anything else. And so that might also include, obviously, your home situation with aspects onto the fourth house, with Rahu, Jupiter, Uranus in your fourth house really shaking things up. And Mars, its ruler, opposite Saturn at this time in your eighth house. So the fourth lord in the eighth house alone would show the potential for changes here. But when you put Mars, the fourth lord, with Venus retrograde and an upcoming Mercury retrograde, there's just a lot to kind of renegotiate here in terms of finances, in terms of all of those things that, family life, home life, all of that is likely, and work life by, Venus's retrograde also is likely to go through so much change right now, and really key pillars of your life, essentially. So Saturn continues to retrograde till November 4th, and it does it every year. So this is year one, and then next year it will do the same in 2024. So this year, I think it's about, the first full retrograde is about really paying attention to the things that have to change. I think if you try and put it off as many as, the time we do try and put Saturn things off, it will eventually come back again, and by next year, it'll make it so that it's inevitable to deal with. So hopefully you have dealt with the changes that have to happen here in your financial life, in your family life, in your home life, in finances more than anything else. When you think about the second, eighth, and 11th houses being implicated here, fourth house more so around the home. So Mars is opposite, like I said, and so that itself has been maybe a tense transit for you to deal with, because Mars is like pushing forward, and it's really the only planet that's pushing forward in this whole period. All the other planets are either retrograde or slowing to retrograde in August. So Mars is the only one pushing ahead. And but at the same time, because it's pushing ahead into change, into eighth house, and very, maybe excitable change as well, and all of that. But it's also unnerving and uncertain change that's going on. And because then it's opposite Saturn, and this would have been felt more so the end of July, but certainly also into the beginning of August, you might feel this kind of constraint or need to focus and not to go just too gung-ho into making too many drastic changes, in other words. Mars then also moves forward into the next sign by the 18th of August. So it goes into Virgo. So let me bring it back to your sign here. So Mars has moved into Virgo by the 18th. And at that stage, of course, the first week, Venus goes back into Cancer, meeting with the sun by mid-month, then also moves into Leo. So there's this big kind of swap over and change over here in the 7th, 8th house, more especially, and then Mars going into your 9th. And all of these opposing, especially the 7th, 8th houses, opposing the 1st and 2nd houses. So essentially what's happening here is that there's kind of more immediate gratification that's possible with these faster moving planets. And at the same time, there's something that's not possible because there's a backtracking and review and reassessment going on with the retrogrades. And again, Mercury retrogrades a few days after Mars moves into Virgo. So that's adding to this kind of need to reassess and review, despite, again, the kind of need in the more immediate time frame, whether it's a relationship need, whether it's a whatever intimacy need, or whatever is a need here that is more instant, but it's having to balance itself off the kind of longer term implications here in terms of the bigger changes that you yourself are going through and your finances and family are going through. So whatever you might want, in other words, out of this, obviously, as is the case, Capricorn, you're always thinking about other people. You really do have to consider other people and your family and all of that, and your home life and all of these financial considerations. And it just might be a lot to consider, and you might feel like there's too much to consider, and it might feel like a weight. But I think without this weight, I think what's happening on the other side of the zodiac could have been a lot messier. In other words, in a way, if you think of it positively, that Saturn's retrograde in your second sign is getting you to focus and maybe limiting your choices so that you can actually focus. Because if you had too much choice, if you had too much potential here and financial freedom to do whatever the hell you wanted to do, then it could have been a lot messier. Let me put it that way. Venus retrogrades back into your 7th house. So relationships, of course, are a key thing here. Family dynamics in terms of your children, for example, but also work-related issues. So if it's a business transaction, be really mindful of that. If it's anyway, love relationship, be mindful of that. It's not the time to be making any definitive decisions about this. And that's more especially actually as Venus comes out of its combustion. So it goes into combustion by the beginning of August and then comes out by the last week of August. And even though it comes out of combustion, so we'll see Venus again as a bright morning star in the morning. It's still tricky because it's still retrograde until the 4th of September. So that in relation to your partner or your relationships, I would say just be mindful of not making any decisions about that. It's about rethinking all of these things and how you approach your loving relationships and your business relationships, and perhaps rethinking that and renegotiating all of those things, but not signing on the dotted line. Like, this is obviously not the best time to get married. It's not the best time to buy anything expensive. It's certainly not the best time to do those things, but you could do things that reassess these things, like, somebody remarrying, somebody recommitting to a relationship, somebody, whether it's business again or not, like it could be a romantic relationship or a business partnership, things like that. So be really open-minded about it, I would say here. What we have going on here, though, is that the sun has come home to its sign in Leo, very strong, but Mercury's retrograde and they're both opposite Saturn. And so again, in a way, it's you that's opposing this. In a way, it's you that's putting up the block, whether you're conscious of that or not, of course. But the block is not a bad thing, essentially. The block is like a deliberate sort of like channeling, kind of funneling of something. It's like you need to put in restrictions in place here because it just needs a kind of container. It needs to be directed somewhere. You need to have a focus. And again, it's a very financial thing, 2nd and 8th houses. So this is where you might kind of come into some sort of interesting dynamic with somebody in your charge, in somebody who's an authority figure in your life. And whether it's your father or boss or somebody else like that, there could be some complexity to deal with here financially because of the second, eighth houses and planets that are moving through here. So Mercury retrograde, like I said, from the 23rd, then brings in Mars in Virgo, because even though Mars is the only planet moving forward now, like at any speed, it's in Virgo. And although it's your ninth sign, it's all very much about planning ahead, and that's all great. Maybe, you know, being very orderly about things and all that. The issue here is that it's opposite Neptune and Mercury's retrograde in your eighth sign. And so whatever plans that you're having right now, and especially if there are travel plans, I would be really cautious with travel plans around this time, Capricorn. I mean, I'm not saying don't travel. Certainly Mars in the ninth house could be that, making plans for that, if not doing that. But I would certainly say keep an open mind about that because of Mercury retrograde and Neptune opposite. So third and ninth house is very much about traveling, and seventh house also, and that's Venus retrograde. So again, maybe just keep an open mind about planning those things. And even if it's that you're not traveling, but you're planning to travel, maybe just, when you have that option to book a flight and it's like you just pay a little bit extra to keep the dates open, or to keep the dates flexible, and maybe that's worth doing, for example. That's just a quick tip there. So that's ninth house, travel, any kind of plans around travel, Mercury retrograde in your eighth house, be open to change, essentially. So I wanted to just highlight the moon phases because we've got an interesting dynamic going on here with the moon phases. We have a full moon on the 1st of August in your sign, and then we have another full moon in your second sign by the 31st of August, with a new moon in your seventh sign, the very last degree of your seventh sign, on the 16th of August. So this is highlighting an interesting dynamic, a transition from your first to your second. Again, it's looking at yourself and the changes that you're personally going through, and really changing your life in a way, and your financial setup and your family dynamics. And so with that last full moon in Aquarius in your second sign, so let me bring this back to your rising sign. So this is the full moon on the 31st of August, with Saturn retrograde here in your second sign, opposite again Sun here, and Mercury retrograde. There's just so much to reconsider here in terms of your financial life, in terms of family life, and home life as well, implicated here because of the aspects. And Mars is itself ruling your fourth house now in your ninth house, that there is something opening up here for sure by the end of August, and more potential, and like planning as well around travel and around home because of Mars's aspect onto your fourth house, especially. So Mars isn't constricted like it was, at least. But it's just, you still have a lot to consider. And like, for example, if there is any changes that you're making, or you actually have moved home, or you're moving home, or you're making renovations to your home, these are all good transits for that. But at the same time, you have to give yourself time to do that. You don't just expect to move into a new place and it's all done. It's like a whole process of redecorating and redoing everything and taking out all the old stuff, and refiling everything and reordering everything. Mars and Virgo can get really bogged down in all of that. So just be mindful of that. I would say that there could be a lot of that going on in August, by the end of August. So for this full moon in your second sign, it's about reordering also your value system. It's like, what is it that's important to you? And I think any changes that are happening in your private life or professional life, in your business or anything, I think it's important to use those as a way to reorder your own personal values. And that's certainly reflected in the Saturn retrograde in your second house, with the full moon by the 31st of August, really highlighting that once again. So Capricorn, again, a complex month. I'm saying it for all the signs. It's a very complex time. All the retrogrades, everything that's going on, all the oppositions, a lot to balance here, a lot to juggle. But if you can, really work with these transits, there's a lot to kind of be open to, and the changes that are very possible now in a more positive way, instead of beating yourself up and sort of working against these natural cycles that are happening, these changes that are inevitable in many ways. So I hope it's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. for Aquarius rising and or moon sign for August 2023. So Aquarius, your ruler Saturn retrogrades in your sign. And so this has been going on for the past few weeks and continues till November 4th. This is a review and reflection on who you are, what you're about, what you stand for, but also what you don't stand for, what you are no longer. And that's very much about the 12th house, Saturn ruling your 12th house of Capricorn. So we start the month off with a full moon in Capricorn and end the month, the very last day of the month, with another full moon, and this time in Aquarius, your rising sign. So it's very much, I think, August, a time for you, Aquarius, about endings and new beginnings. There is a sense of something ending now, and it's kind of come to this now. It's been in the process for some time now, in fact, a few years now. But it's kind of like August is in a way the sort of highlighting that how all of these changes that have been happening over a long time can actually kind of really happen very quickly, then all of a sudden, it seems. So again, the full moon in your 12th house on the 1st of August, the full moon in your first house, the 31st of August, highlights that shift and sort of bookends the month in that kind of more intense way of change. And there's a lot of change going on in August. It's a very complex month. I've been saying it to all the signs, and you're no different in many ways. But I do think that in many ways that the transits for you are more positive in many ways also. And again, Saturn in your first sign, is positive in a not an obvious way necessarily. It's positive in a way that it's kind of like a slow build. Positive in that, there's a kind of demolition that has to happen first for you, the changes that have to happen. And it might feel like the last while has been about that sort of demolition process more than anything before the rebuilding. But I think that there's a rebuilding phase coming, and I think that you can really start to implement the new you in many ways. And yeah, it's a slow process that you go through all the time. You might say every year, but because it's in your sign this year, Saturn, and next year, these are the years of you kind of going through this major change in how you see yourself as well, and what you're doing and your work in life and all of that, and how you relate to other people and how you communicate with other people, how you express yourself, whether creatively or not, how you just communicate in terms of communicating who you are. That's Saturn in the first house. It aspects these key areas of, third, seventh, and 10th house. So it's like how do you communicate with yourself also, not just with other people. It's also about how do you engage with other people. Yes, but how engaging with other people, you kind of have to know yourself. So this is very much a kind of like get to know yourself kind of transit. At the same time, Rahu, which is your other ruler, because according to traditional Indian astrology, Rahu co-rules Aquarius, not Uranus. But Uranus, if you imply Uranus here as well, is also in your third sign. So Rahu and Uranus and Jupiter are all in your third sign, where Saturn aspects strongly looks at. So third sign is very much about communication. It's very much about creative self-expression also. But any kind of communication, any kind of back and forth, anything that you want, really. It's the third house is very much about I want that. And because it's Aries, it's very much about I want that. And Mars, which rules this, is in your seventh whole sign. Mars in your seventh whole sign, opposite Saturn in your first sign. That has been conflicted of late for sure, and you might have felt that as this kind of push, but at the same time, this pushback with Saturn, and it could have built up in some tension that you've been experiencing. But I think it's a more positive tension for you other than other signs. I mean, I do feel like the Saturn signs, Capricorn and Aquarius, are having a better deal of it in many ways at this time. Whereas Mars' signs, maybe not so. Mars, in a way, feels hampered by Saturn. Saturn is so strong and retrograde in Aquarius. Mars, though strong in Leo, is just, and gung-ho, is just held back. And it's aspected by Rahu, your other ruler from Aries, which kind of blocks Mars in a way. So Mars is definitely held back more. And that is, again, maybe the third sign and your 10th sign, your work, career life, your creative self-expression, or any kind of work expression, and travel and work travel, and all of these issues maybe being something that kind of feels constricted in a way, in other words. But again, I just do feel that the Saturn being so strong is getting you to focus. And I think that's a positive thing. Mars actually moves anyway, so it's not long before you have to wait for Mars to move by the 18th. So let me show you that here. So Mars on the 18th moves into Virgo, and out of that constraint in a way from the opposition of your ruler Saturn. And instead now Mars is out of the constraint of Saturn and Rahu, instead aspects Rahu in your third sign. I think this can be where you start to get a bit more expressive. Let me put it that way. So from the 18th of August, I think this could be somewhere where you can be more expressive and kind of go for what you want and challenge yourself, or are challenged by others to get what you want, to do what you want. That could be in terms of professionally as well as any other which way, just going for what you want. At the same time, I think that this is complex because a few days after this, Mercury stations retrograde. So now we have all of the planets, bar Mars, either retrograde or about to, in the case of Jupiter. Um, Mars is the only one that isn't. So Mars, in terms of your career and all of that, and what you want to go for now, and what you want to do, what you would love to do right now, is highlighted here. At the same time, there is some red tape. Let me put it that way. So Mars in Virgo, first of all, it doesn't really like being in Virgo because it just wants to do, and it cannot do because there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of details to sort out first. So you might get a bit bogged down in the sort of planning stages, planning everything in August. You might get a bit bogged down in all the things that have to be redone as well, because Mercury then goes retrograde from the 23rd. You might having to deal with this with other people, with your partner, with other people professionally as well. And so I guess just be mindful of it, to be patient with it, that there are some things to work out here. The sun now is in opposition to Saturn also, which is like you, your partner, and you kind of meeting this kind of tension between the two of you in some way, with the changes that you're personally going through and they are personally going through. So I think that, again, although I think this is complex and challenging for many signs, I think Aquarius, you're the one sign, perhaps along with Capricorn, that I feel like this could be a bit more in your favor, that there could be a lot of potential for good things happening here. And well, it's good for everybody in one way. Everything is good for something. But I just think, Aquarius, that this is more potentially an easier ride for you. But you still have to meet with the challenge. You still have to meet with something here and delay or step back, or getting bogged down in the red tape and not being able to move forward when you want to, not being able to do what you want when you want. There's definitely some sort of kind of restriction going on here, that needs to be addressed. So that is Mars. Venus, I want to go back and show you what Venus is doing, because it's doing this whole thing. So by the first week, I'll show you here. Go back to your sign. By the first week, by the 7th of August, it goes back into Cancer. So Venus is retrograde in Leo in your 7th sign. A lot of emphasis on the 7th sign around other, the partner, relating to others, all of that. But then it goes back into your 6th sign, and it goes into combustion from the 6th, 7th of August. And so continues in combustion until the end of August, and then reappears as the bright morning star by the end of August, and then continues to retrograde though until the 4th of September. So this is a tricky transition in terms of Venus related things, and this means home and travel. This means studies also, but also happiness and hope for something. And I think that there might be, in August, something that's lost here and something that needs to be lost. There might be changes that are happening in your home life or something like that. Your parents might be going through changes if it's not, more obviously in your life. But there's something changing here around travel plans and home plans and all of these things that you have to kind of negotiate with and find, some enjoyment in the everyday sort of dealing with all of the details, like I said, with the Mercury, but now also Venus in the 6th. And the 6th house is very much like Mercury, like Virgo. It's very much about everyday stuff. And Venus doesn't really like it here, because Venus in the 6th kind of wants to just enjoy itself. And it has to deal with stuff that you maybe would prefer not to deal with, but you have to. So this is the one thing I would say about the whole month and all of the transits, Aquarius, I feel is a bit more challenging, and the other things may be more helpful, but this is one of the more challenging things with Venus. But apart from that, I do think that it's a positive time overall. Now, I want to show you the new moon on the 16th, because that is in your, let me go back here to your rising sign. So this is in your, let's just pretend that the moon is the very end of degree here of Cancer, because I want to keep it in your rising sign. So the sun is at 29 degrees of Cancer, and the moon joins it on the 16th of August. This is the very last degree here of the 6th sign, Cancer, where Venus is retrograde. So this is where I think the new moon starts, but also because it's the last degree, there's an ending here, and it's maybe an ending of a habit, an ending of a daily routine, an ending of a, living in a certain way, or a situation of doing something in a particular way that has to change now, and kind of loosening those bonds, I would say, this new moon on the 16th. I think it's an important new moon for you. I think it's a time to really try out something a different way. And even that can be positive, even though, again, you might not feel with the Venus there in the 6th like it's always enjoyable, but I think that it can be very useful for you and improve your life enormously. So, Aquarius, I hope that's been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead, and until next time. For Pisces rising and or moon sign for August 2023, Pisces, your ruler Jupiter is in Aries, continues to move through Aries, and in August it will begin to slow down by the end of the month, and by the very beginning of September it will station retrograde at 21 degrees of Aries. So this I'll talk about more in September, of course, but I think August is setting this up in a way, because we have by then all of the planets bar Mars retrograde by the beginning of August. So although at that stage, of course, Venus will station direct on the day that Jupiter stations retrograde. So that's a whole other, it's like passing on the baton of, retrograde from Venus to Jupiter. But let's start with Venus, actually, because even though it's not your ruler, I want to start with it because it's a key one here. Venus is retrograde in your 6th house, and it's aspected by your ruler Jupiter. All of these planets lined up in your 6th house, Leo, opposite Saturn in your 12th house. There's a lot here, as I've been saying to all the signs, that needs to be balanced off each other. And this juxtaposed kind of position could be very conflicted in many ways. A lot of oppositions going on with the planets, a lot of struggle in one way. But another way you can think about it is balance, is finding space for both. I think Venus retrograde in the 6th is one of the more challenging aspects for you initially, at least until the well into the first week of August, because then it goes back into your 5th house, a much better position. So Venus in the 6th, why is that a challenge? Because the 6th house is all about the everyday stuff that you're maybe asked to enjoy, but maybe you don't enjoy. Venus in the 6th house doesn't want to do all the everyday stuff and all of the responsibilities and all the things it would prefer not to do. It wants to party, it wants to enjoy itself. 6th house is not really about enjoyment, it's about work. So that's one thing to be mindful of Venus. But as it goes back into your 5th sign by the 7th of August, although going into combustion at that point, retrograde and combust, as in not visible in the sky anymore in August, enjoyments maybe seem to slip away on the one hand, but on the other hand, because it's also retrograde, it's about going within to find that inner joy, a sense of inner joy and happiness, not always looking for it outwardly. If you look for it outwardly, of course, you could find it, but you could also find disappointment. You could also find a lack of that. And you might find that, again, this Venus combustion retrograde is a process of purification itself. So, when you're going through a process of purification, that means in terms of enjoyments, well, it doesn't mean that it comes as easily. That, it's a time to, it's a fancy way of saying basically that we have to actually give up that thing that we're doing, that actually it might be enjoyable, but maybe we shouldn't be doing that anymore. Maybe it's not even good for our health anymore. Maybe I have to think about another way of approaching that. Now, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a thing that you want, whether it's an intimacy, a sexual thing, whether it's whatever it is that you want, and whatever it is that you would love to do, and whoever it is that you want, I think there's a purification process going here for you in terms of relationships in a big way, even though Venus isn't specifically a partner, it's very much a lover. It's very much a thing you love. So whether it's a child, it's a lover, it's a thing you do that you love, and you have to go through a process essentially in August to purify that, which means in short to maybe change that, to transform it into something else, and to go within to find that strength within in that aspect of your life. Mars is going to move forward. I'll show you here a few days, a week after. It's on the 18th. So if I go back here to your sign, Pisces, you can see here it's moving into your 7th host sign. So by the 18th of August, Mars is moving into your 7th host sign in Virgo. And a few days after that, Mercury stations retrograde in your 6th sign. So Venus is going to continue to retrograde. Saturn, Neptune, Pluto, Uranus will retrograde by the end of the month. Rahu, obviously, Ketu always retrograde. Jupiter, your ruler, will actually retrograde by the beginning of September. All of the planets are retrograde by the end of August, except for Mars. So if Mars is the only planet that's not retrograde, it's moving into your 7th sign with its ruler Virgo retrograde in your 6th sign. There's definitely a potential conflict developing here. And that's not such a bad thing necessarily. It just depends on how you handle it. Mars in the 7th house can be conflicted because Mars is a bit gung-ho. It's a bit like, too brash and impulsive and reckless even in relationships. So it doesn't really suit the 7th house so much because it's not so much about considering the other. It's about just blurting something out and maybe actually even hurting the other. So this is something to be mindful of, especially now when Mercury goes retrograde, that you're not blurting that out. Of course, that you have to be mindful of your relationships and your dealings with everybody, I would say, but especially your partner. There could be some conflict here going on, and this is something to draw your attention to. At the same time, I think because Mars is the only planet going forward, it's about planning ahead for sure. If there's something to plan ahead here, you just have to be really mindful of reviewing as you go. And the whole reassessment that has to take place as you kind of are gung-ho about something, because Mars itself in Virgo isn't necessarily just go ahead and do it without thinking. It's actually about maybe even overthinking it, which is why Mars doesn't like Virgo, essentially, because it has to think about all of the steps. It has to think about all of the things it needs to do, all of the red tape along the way. So I would say try not to get too bogged down in it and think about the other end of the spectrum where Neptune has settled into your sign, Pisces. And although Mars Neptune oppositions can feel a bit confusing itself and not being really clear about the details, even though there's a need to be very, very clear about them, there might be a confusion about the bigger picture here. And what is the bigger picture? In this case, Neptune in your sign, Pisces, is about you, is about what you stand for and who you are. And this could be who you are from any perspective, whether it's even you physically. If this is your rising sign, it's like maybe just wanting to put on the rose tinted glasses and see yourself in a different way. This could be a good time to see yourself in that kind of dreamy way. It's like what I could be, the ideal me. Thinking about that, the reason why that could challenge relationships is that you're not seeing yourself as you are or seeing the other as they are. You're trying to, see something as you would like it to be, the ideal. Then the frustration when things kind of have to be dealt with in a very down-to-earth practical way with somebody who's maybe more obviously pointing out things like flaws to you in a practical way, because it might not be so obviously coming from you. It might come from somebody else, like somebody, it might be pointing something out to you that you don't want to look at, for example, or you just don't want to have to deal with. And yet it's asking you to deal with it, whatever ideal you have going on in your own self. And so this is a tricky balance to find for sure, along with all the other tricky balances in terms of, again, we're starting the month off with a Saturn-Mars opposition. We then go into Sun, Saturn opposition. We have a continued Venus-Pluto opposition. We started with the Venus-Saturn opposition. All of these planets on one side of the zodiac opposing all of these on the other. And so all of these ones, Venus, Sun, Mercury, Mars, are all the faster moving planets and the sort of the more immediate sort of time frame. It's like, this is what I want. I would love to do this. These are the steps it takes. And this is what I want to do. But then all of these planets, Pluto, Saturn, Neptune, it's like, okay, I want to do that. But then I have to think about these consequences, the long-term implications here. I have to think about the give and take here. What am I gaining from this? What am I going to lose out? If I do this, what happens in the long term? And if I do this, what does that mean? What does that say about me? Who am I actually? These are all the Saturn, Pluto, Neptune configurations in these signs. So there's definitely sort of everything sort of in a juxtaposed position here. And again, that can be quite tense, but it could also be quite interesting and dynamic, this kind of opposing sort of bouncing off each other kind of dynamic. It really depends on how you handle it, essentially. And as that's all happening, of course, the nodes continue through your 2nd and 8th sign. So you're really fundamentally shifting a lot of key things around your financial life and all of that, and family life, and your values and all of that are going to be really, have been for actually over a year now, been going through a lot of changes. But the upcoming, and I just want to highlight this because even though it doesn't happen until September, in a way, August is setting it up for your ruler Jupiter to station retrograde at 21 degrees of Aries. So by the end of August, it's not moving anywhere. It's staying at 21 degrees. It'll backtrack. So station essentially by the end of August and backtrack to the end of the year, 31st of December. So from September to the 31st of December, Jupiter is moving backwards through your second sign of family, finances, values, and really considering and reconsidering the direction your life is taking in terms of the financial setup that you're currently experiencing, because it's your 10th lord as well. So very much about reconsidering work as well, as also like the sixth house being really impacted here overall in terms of day-to-day work. This is really more considering your career objectives and prospects in the future, and considering your financial setup as well. So a Jupiter retrograde at the same degrees that Mercury previously retrograded here in April and May is really highlighting some theme that might have come up in April, May, for you to look at now and to really reassess in a big way in terms of your bigger goals and your career objectives, I would say. And all of this while you're trying to see yourself in a different way, you know, and view yourself in this kind of more idealized way, you know. And again, nothing wrong with that, except you need to just also get on with the details of the day. And again, it might be another person, a situation that you have to meet with that starkly contrasts that for you, that gives you that sense of this is the way it is, and this is what needs to be done, or whatever, right? So a complex month for sure. Pisces, I just want to mention before I leave it, the lunar phases. So we're going to start the month with a full moon in Capricorn, and we're going to end the month with a full moon in Aquarius. So the 1st of August, the full moon in Capricorn with Pluto. The 31st of August, the full moon with Saturn in Aquarius. So this transition, in a way, I feel this is an important one. And in the middle of those two, we have a new moon in Cancer, the very last degree of Cancer in your 5th sign. 5th, 11th, 12th. Well, essentially, I think what this means is this transition from 11th to 12th full moons with that new moon in the middle and the 5th. It's like, what is it that you would love to do and what you would love to gain from this, but what needs to be sacrificed in doing so? And again, thinking about the more immediate time frame and the more immediate gratification from anything that you would like to do, and then thinking about the long-term implications and what could be lost, or then also what could be gained in that process. So it's almost like you have to kind of lose something to gain something. It's like you have to put something into it to get out of it. You have to maybe spend a little to make a little, things like that. You can think about it in that way. And I think this transition from full moon to full moon throughout the month will be an important one of give and take, in a way, of gains and losses and things like that. So again, don't think of losses as such a bad thing. Is that it's just something that maybe some sense of something that is, even whether it's practical or not, something that is just not actually, meant to be. It's like that saying, be careful what you wish for. Maybe some of the things that you wish for are best not to happen. And the things that you had no idea were possible can then open up to you. And so Saturn in the 12th, more than anything, I would say, and its retrograde is about removing those obstacles to what you see as a potential for your future. But it's in a way a kind of ending phase in your life in many ways. And that full moon at the end of the month then in your 12th sign is highlighting that, I guess, that ending phase, that something has to be sacrificed for you to gain something, for you to do something with this. And as this Saturn opposes the sun in your 6th sign with Mercury retrograde and Mars in your 7th, there's something to have to let go of here for you to get something out of it, I would say. And it's a lot of give and take that has to happen, I would say. So Pisces, I hope that has been of help. As always, I wish you the very best for the month ahead. And until next time.